I'm what you call a collector of bootleg Pokemon games. Pokemon Diamond and Jade, Chaos Black, etc. It's amazing the frequency with which you can find them at pawn shops, Goodwill, flea market, and such. They're generally fun, even if they are unplayable, which they often are. The mistranslations and poor quality make them unintentionally humorous. I've been able to find most of the ones that I've played online, but there's one that I haven't seen any mention of. I bought it at a flea market about 5 years ago. Here's a picture of the cartridge in case anyone recognizes it. Unfortunately, when I moved 2 years ago, I lost the game. So I can't provide you with any real screen caps. The game started with the familiar Nidorino and Gengar intro of Red and Blue version. However, the press start screen had been altered. Red was there, but the Pokemon did not cycle through. It also said Black version under the Pokemon logo. Upon selecting New Game, the game started the Professor Oak speech, and it quickly became evident that the game was essentially Pokemon Red version. After selecting your starter, if you looked at your Pokemon, you had, in addition to Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle, another Pokemon, Ghost. The Pokemon was level 1. It had the sprite of the ghost that was encountered in Lavender Town before obtaining the Sylph Scope. It had one attack, Curse. I know there was a real move named Curse, but the attack did not exist in Generation 1, so it appears it was hacked in. Defending Pokemon were unable to attack Ghost. It would only say they were too scared to move. And when the move Curse was used in battle, the screen would cut to black. The cry of the defending Pokemon would be heard, but it would be distorted, played at a much lower pitch than normal. The battle screen would then reappear and the defending Pokemon would be gone. If used in a battle against a trainer, when the Pokeballs representing their Pokemon would appear in the corner, they would have one fewer Pokeball. The implication was that the Pokemon died. What's even stranger is that after defeating a trainer and seeing Red receive $200 for winning, the battle commands would appear again. If you selected Run, the battle would end as it normally does. You could also select Curse. If you did, upon returning to the overworld, the trainer's sprite would be gone. After leaving and returning to the area, the spot where the trainer had been would be replaced with a tombstone, like the ones at Lavender Town. The move Curse was not usable in all instances. It would fail against ghost Pokemon. It would also fail if it was used against trainers that you would have to face again, such as your rival or Giovanni. It was usable in your final battle against them, however. I figured this was the gimmick of the game, allowing you to use the previously uncapturable ghosts. And because Curse made the game so easy, I essentially used it throughout the whole adventure. The game changed quite a bit after defeating the Elite Four. After viewing the Hall of Fame, which consisted of Ghost and a couple of Pokemon I used for HMs, the screen cut to black. A box appeared with the words, "Many years later." It then cut to Lavender Town. An old man was standing, looking at Tombstone. You then realized that this man was your character. The man moved at only half your normal walking speed. You no longer had any Pokemon with you, not even Ghost, who up to this point had been impossible to remove from your party through depositing in the PC. The overworld was entirely empty. There was no people at all. There were still the tombstones of the trainers who you used Curse on, however. You could go pretty much anywhere in the overworld at this point, though your movement was limited by the fact that you had no Pokemon to use HMs. And regardless of where you went, the music of Lavender Town continued on an infinite loop. After wandering for a while, I found that if you go through Diglett's Cave, one of the cuttable bushes that normally blocks the path on the other side is no longer there, allowing you to advance and return to Pallet Town. Upon entering your house and going to the exact tile where you start the game, the screen would cut to black. Then a sprite of a Caterpie appeared. It was replaced by a Weedle, and then a Pidgey. And I soon realized as the Pokemon progressed from Rattata to Blastoise that these were all the Pokemon that I had used Curse on. After the end of my rival's team, a youngster appeared, then a bug catcher. These were the trainers I had cursed. Throughout the sequence, the Lavender Town music was playing, but it slowed, decreasing in pitch. By the time your rival appeared on screen, it was little more than a demonic rumble. Another cut to black. A few moments later, the battle screen suddenly appeared. Your trainer sprite was now of an old man, the same one as the one who teaches you how to catch Pokemon in Viridian City. Ghost appears on the other side, along with the words, "Ghost wants to fight." You couldn't use items, you had no Pokemon. If you tried to run, you couldn't escape. The only option was fight. Using fight would immediately cause you to use struggle, which didn't affect Ghost, but did chip off a bit of your own HP. When it was Ghost's turn to attack, it would simply say, ... Eventually, when your HP reached a critical point, Ghost would finally use Curse. The screen would cut to black, a final time. Regardless of the buttons you pressed, you were permanently stuck in this black screen. At this point, the only thing you could do was turn off the Game Boy. When you played again, New Game was the only option. The game had erased the file. I had I'd played through this hacked game many times, and every time the game ended with this sequence. Several times I didn't use Ghost at all, though he was impossible to remove from the party. In these cases, it didn't show any Pokemon or trainers, and simply cut to the climactic battle with Ghost. I'm not sure what the motives were behind the creator of this hack. It wasn't widely distributed, so it was presumably not for monetary gain. It was very well done for a bootleg. It seems he was trying to convey a message, though it seems I'm the sole receiver of this message. I'm not entirely sure what it was. The inevitability of death, the pointlessness of it. Perhaps he was simply trying to morbidly inject death and darkness into a children's game. Regardless, this children's game has made me think, and it's made me cry.
During the first few days of the release of Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, back in February 27th, 1996, a peak of deaths appeared in the age group of 10 to 15. The children were usually found dead through suicide, by hanging or jumping from heights. However, some were more odd. A few cases recorded children who had began sawing off their limbs, others sticking their faces inside the oven and choking themselves in their own fists, shoving their arms down their throat. The few children who were saved before killing themselves showed sporadic behavior. When asked why they were going to hurt themselves, they only answered in chaotic screams and scratched at their own eyes. When showed what seemed to be the connections to this attitude, the Game Boy, they had no response. But when combined with either Pokemon Red or Green, the screams would continue, and they would do their best to leave the room it was located in. This confirmed the authorities' suspicion that the game somehow had a connection to these children and their deaths. It was a strange case because many children who had the same games did not show this behavior. Only a few. The police had no choice but to pursue this, since they had no other leads. Collecting all the cartridges these children had purchased, they kept them sealed away as strong evidence to look over later. They decided the first thing to do was to talk to the programmers themselves. The first person they met was the director of the original games, Satoshi Tajiri. When told about the deaths surrounding the games, he seemed slightly uneasy, but admitted nothing. He led them to the main programmers of the game, the people responsible for the actual content. The detectives met Taki Noriota, one of the main programmers of the game. Unlike Satoshi, he did not seem uneasy, but very kept, explaining that it was impossible to use something like a game to cause such deaths, and also bringing up the point that not all the children were affected. He brushed it off as some kind of odd coincidence or mass hysteria. It seemed like he was hiding something, but he wasn't giving away. Finally, he did say something interesting. Takanori had heard a rumor going around that music for Lavender Town, one of the locations in the game, had caused some of the children to go ill. It was only a rumor, and he had no real definite backup, but it was still something to look into. He pointed the detectives to Junichi Masuda, the music composer of the series. Masuda had also heard of these rumors, but again said they had no evidence his music was the cause. Even to prove a point, he played the exact song from the game completely through with no effects to anyone. The detectives, nor Masuda himself, feeling anything different or odd. Although they still had their suspicions of Masuda and the music of Lavender Town, it seemed they had reached another dead end. Going back to the cartridges they'd seized from the homes of the children, they decided to take a slightly more direct look at the games. They knew that it was these games that gave the children the ill effects. So they took extreme caution, popping in the cartridge and turning the console on. The game screen booted, the title screen appeared, and the option to continue or create a new game appeared on screen. When they chose to continue the game, stats of that game popped up. They saw the names of the children who had played, usually Red or another simple name. However, the interesting thing was the time played and the number of Pokemon they owned on every game. The time was very low, and all of them had only a single Pokemon in their inventory. They came to the stunning reality that it could not have been the music from Lavender Town that caused such ill effects in the children, since it was impossible to reach that part of the game in such small amounts of time, and with only one Pokemon in their inventory. This brought them to the conclusion that something early on in the game had to be the cause. If it wasn't the music, nor the title screen, it had to be something within the first few minutes of the game itself. They had no choice but to turn off the game and go back to the programmers. Asking for a list of all the programmers from Takanori, they found, surprisingly, that one of the programmers had committed suicide shortly after the game was released. His name was Chiro Miura. A very obscure programmer who had provided very little for the game. Even more interestingly, he had requested his name did not appear in the credits. And so, it was not. Looking over the evidence found at Chiro's apartment, they found many notes written in bold marker. Most of it was crumbled or marked out, making it very difficult to read. The few words they could find in the mass was, "Do not enter, watch out, and come follow me," in bold. The detectives were unsure what these meant, but knew they had to have a connection. Further searching, they discovered Chiro was good friends with one of the map designers, Koji Nishino, and was probably the only reason Chiro had given a part in making the game. Nishino, since the release of the game, had locked himself in his apartment, barely leaving in the dark of the night to fetch anything that he might need. He told his friends and family he was mourning for his dear friend Chiro. But they didn't believe this, since Nishino had locked himself up the day the game was put in stores, a few days before Chiro had killed himself. It was troubling. But the authorities finally persuaded Nishino to sit down and speak with them. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days, dark rings under his eyes. He stunk. His nails had grown black, and his hair was greasy, sticking to his forehead and neck. He spoke in stutters and murmurs, but at least he did have something to say. When asked if he knew anything about the children who had died after exposure of the game, and if they had any connection to the game at all, he answered them seemingly carefully, choosing his words thoughtfully before answering. He told them that his friend Chiro had an interesting idea with the game, something he had wanted to try since he heard the project was starting. Nishino himself knew Takanori, the game, the director and main programmer, for a long time. He could easily get a mediocre programmer in on the project with little persuasion. It seemed Chiro had convinced Nishino to get him on the project. And it had worked. The detectives knew that they were onto something. This unknown, obscure programmer, Chiro, had something to do with it. Something. They asked what Chiro's idea was, why he wanted so badly to have a part in making this children's game. Nishino told them that Chiro never told him about it, other than a few details every now and then. He wanted to insert a special Pokemon in the game, one completely different from all the others. It would serve as an extra, a kind of out-of-place thrill for the player. It wasn't, however, missing now. It couldn't be. With the gameplay time recorded on the cartridges, it was impossible for the children to have time to meet that Pokemon. Nishino, throughout the entire conversation, seemed to break down even more with every question. The detectives pushed him more and more, searching through his mind for any and every scrap of knowledge this man had on the game and Chiro. and Chiro's intentions. It was when they asked him about the notes found in Chiro's home that he snapped. From under the couch Nisino was sitting on, he whipped up a pistol, pointed it straight at the police while backing away a few steps. Then, just as quickly, he brought the pistol to his face. "Don't follow me," muttered Nisino as he stuck the pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. It was too quick for the police to react. It was done. Nisino had killed himself, repeating slightly differently what was written on one of Chiro's papers. It seemed all leads had finally died. The team who had created this original game were splitting up, becoming harder to find. It was as if they were keeping a secret. When the police finally managed to talk with anyone who had parts in the game, even the obscure character designers or monster designers, it seemed they had nothing of interest to say. Most of them didn't even know Chiro, and the few who did only saw him once or twice working on the game itself. Throughout all of this, the only confirmation they had was that Chiro was indeed the one who had worked on the very early parts of the game. It had been a couple of months after the original children's suicides, and the death rate had dropped dramatically. It seemed that the game was no longer giving any ill effects to any children. The recall of games that was planned was cancelled, since it seemed the game was no longer harming anyone. They had begun to think that maybe Takinori was right, and it was all just a very odd coincidence or mass hysteria. Until they received a letter. It was given to one of the detectives himself, quite directly out on the street. It was a woman who gave him the note, a very frail, thin, sick-looking thing. She gave him the letter quickly, telling him it was something he needed to see, and without waiting for a response or another word, she disappeared into the crowd. The detective brought it to his office, and calling the others in, he brought it out and read it aloud. It was a letter written by Chiro himself, but it wasn't one found at his apartment. They had thoroughly searched and cleared out the place, so wherever this letter had come from, it wasn't kept at his home. It was signed to be given to Nisino. It started off quite formally. A hello, how are you? Regards to the family and such. After one or two of these normal paragraphs, they reached a section that requested Nisino to get him into the game team, and to get him a programming position in Pokemon Red and Green. As the letter continued, the handwriting seemed to grow more jittery. He talked about a glorious idea he had, a way to program something unseen in any game before. He said that it would certainly revolutionize not only the gaming industry, but everyone. He went on to say that it was a very simple procedure to program this idea into the game. He did not even have to add any foreign programming, but could use what was already given in the game itself. This would, the detectives agreed, make it impossible to notice any obscurities in the programming. It was a perfect way to hide whatever it was. The letter ended abruptly. There was no goodbye, no say hi to the family, no write back, or thank you. Nothing like that. It was just his name, written hard in the letter where the paper almost broke through. It was only his name. Chiro Mira. It was the nail in the coffin for the detectives. They had more suspicion about the cause. Chiro had programmed something into the early parts of the game, something maddening, to further increase his streak of success. They discovered the programming team had worked in pairs, even Chiro himself. He worked with another programmer, Sasuke Tamada. If anyone knew what the secret in this game was, Sasuke Tamada would be the man. This was their final hope of unraveling this mystery once and for all. They learned Sasuke had provided a lot of programming to the game and seemed to be an average, hard-working employee. They were easily allowed into his home, a fair place, and they entered his living room where they sat. Sasuke did not sit, however. He stood by the window of the second-story floor, looking out into the busy street. He was smiling a little. There was no direct witnesses to the events that followed. The only thing from the conversation that remained was on a voice recorder sitting on the table in front of the two detectives assigned to Sasuke. What follows is transcribed and translated from an unedited recording.
Sasuke Tamada, what part did you have in the games Pokemon Red and Green? I was a programmer. That's all. I'm right in knowing that the programmers working on the game worked in teams. You would be right. And your partner, his name was Chiro. Chiro Mira. What was his name? Chiro Mira. Could you tell us if Mira ever acted strange at all? Any particular behaviors you observed while working with him at all? I don't know him that well. We didn't meet up frequently, only every once in a while to trade data, or when the entire group was called up for a meeting. That's the only times I really ever saw him. He acted normal. As far as I could tell, he was a short man, and I think this affected his consciousness. He acted weaker than any other man I met. He was willing to do a lot of work to gain recognition. Yes, I don't know. I think... Yes? You think what? I think he was a very weak man. I think he wanted to prove himself regardless of this point. I think he wanted to make himself known for something special, something that would make people forget about the way he looked and pay attention to the powerful mind that lay inside of his skull. Unfortunately for him, however, he didn't have much of a mind to back up that reasoning. Why do you say that? Well, it's the simple truth. He was nothing special, even if he wanted to believe so. You can't become greatness, even if you believe it. It's impossible. Somehow, I think Chiro knew this himself. Somewhere deep in there, he knew it. Can you tell us what Chiro's part of the game was? What did he work on, exactly? Nothing. I mean, nothing important. He worked on some obscure parts of the beginning of the game. It was Oak's part, to be exact. He worked on some of Oak's parts when he's first seen, you see. What else? We know that you know about the children and the details. We know it was Chiro who did it. He programmed something into the game. What are you implying? We're implying that since you're his partner, if you're hiding something from us, then you could be just as responsible for those children's deaths as Chiro himself. You can't prove anything! Tell us what Chiro did in the game! What I told him to! You wanna know, huh? You wanna know what this is all about? Chiro was an idiot. He'd do anything for a bit of attention, anything at all. He couldn't program worth shit either. The only thing that he could do, however, was be manipulated. You could tell him what to do, and he'd do it. He wouldn't even question it. He'd do it, just to hear that thank you when you received the final product. That was his reasons. That's all he wanted. I could control his flawlessly. He's a lot like Takanori. Of course, none of you knew this, but I was the only one who brought up the idea of the game, the idea of the entire operation. I told that man what to do, and he followed me without a doubt. He knows nothing. Just like Chiro.
Don't.
Let me tell you about a mechanic
Closer.
in the game.
Don't make a move.
Consider it a hint, alright? If you walk around in grassy areas enough, a Pokemon will appear, and you'll have the chance to go into a battle with it. It's a necessary part of the game overall, you see? At the start of the game, you have to walk into the grassy areas before Oak appears, and you receive your first Pokemon. Understand me? Under normal circumstances, it was programmed that even though you're in a grassy area, no Pokemon will spawn. I made it different. I manipulated Chiro. Told him what to put in the program, gave him all the instructions on how to do it, and he did it flawlessly. It's rare. It could happen. Stepping into the grass, step away from the window. One can spawn. We won't warn you again. Shoot me. Shoot me. You're as dumb as Chiro was. Once he found out the truth, he had to end it. It was his fault, after all. He shot himself because of it. And you're so determined to finish that case of yours. You want to know? Play the damn game yourself. Roll the wheel, and who knows? Maybe you'll learn the secrets. Step away from the window. Sasuke, we will shoot you. Come follow me. Stop! Come follow me.
The recorder continued until the tape ran out. There was nothing else on it. The police arrived on the scene quickly, and to their horror, they discovered Sasuke and the two detectives dead. They had been found on the street outside of the two-story house. They had all been shot, but not after quite a struggle. The detectives had been shot multiple times, at least 10 each. Sasuke himself had clearly died of 2 shots to his chest, straight through his heart. This game was causing quite a massacre. At least 100 children were dead. Nisino, the unsuspecting friend, dead. Chiro, the manipulated toy, dead. The 2 detectives, dead. And now, even the creator, the cause of this atrocity, Sasuke, dead. This game was stretching far over its original intention. It was killing anyone and everyone who got involved. The lead detective had decided to put this case away. The man who committed the crime was dead, so there was no longer any reason to continue the case. All evidence, all cartridges, all notes, all letters, they were locked away, kept in the darkness where they belonged. There were talks about the entire thing, small conversations every now and then, but over the years, even these began to fade away. The case was only a memory in the minds of those who experienced it firsthand. 10 years passed. February 27, 2006 was the date. The lead detective, the man who locked away the original evidence 10 years previously, was reminded of the awful event that occurred. Although he no longer served the justice system, he still had access to the files, and was helped when he could. The remainder of that event caused him to look back. The reminder of that event caused him to look back, to open the sealed container that held all the evidence collected. He read through the letters and the notes. He remembered the woman who had appeared to him on the street that one day, and handed him that letter that led to change the entire case. He wondered who she was, and where she had come from. Perhaps she was Chiro's mother, or maybe Sasuke's. It was far too late to pursue any of this, far too late. Sealing the container again, he saw a second one directly behind it. Pulling it out, he read the note on top. Evidence, number 2104A. He opened it and looked inside. Filling the container were exactly 104 Pokemon Red and Green cartridges, each one in perfect condition, untouched since the day they had last checked, 10 years ago. He reached in and pulled one out. Pokemon Red. He hadn't seen one in a long time. He didn't know what he thought next, but he reached in his desk and pulled out the old Game Boy. He received it long ago, but it still worked. It was his son's. His son's who had passed away just a few years ago. His wife gone too. That was in the past. Popping the cartridge in the back of the Game Boy, he turned on the system. The title screen. Then the option to continue or start a new game. Tanaka. That was the child's name. The one who had played it first. He pressed new game. He was normal, average. He walked around, talked to his mother, went outside. He started walking towards the grass. In his head, he could still hear Sasuke's words. Even though he wasn't there anymore. Even though he had never seen the man in his life. He could still hear him. Come follow me. He was getting closer and closer. Only a step or two away. Roll the wheel and who knows? Maybe you'll learn the secret for yourself. He entered the grass. The screen did nothing at first, nothing at all. It just sat there, and so did the detective. Completely frozen, as if time had stopped just for them. The screen went black, and then lit up again. The iconic green background with black text appeared. The lead detective's weary eyes grew wide. He couldn't help but read out what there was in front of him. Come follow me. Come follow me. Come follow me. I miss you, Dad. I miss you, husband. I miss you so much. Tears formed in his eyes, falling down his cheeks. Screens and screens of text appeared, and he rapidly clicked the A button to continue it. It was his wife and his child. They were speaking to him, calling to him, crying with him. They wanted to see him. They loved him. He loved them. I love you too, muttered the man in a hoarse, scratching voice. Come follow me. Become new again. We want to see you, and hold you, and be with you forever, and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever, and ever. Don't stay away. You can see us too. We miss you. Come follow me. We love you. A black screen. The detective's eyes grew wide, his jaw dropped. The screen lit back up, and Oak was sending him out into the grass. Come follow me, said Oak. No! Shouted the man, dropping the game onto the floor. He quickly fell forward, reaching for it, bringing the screen back up to his face. Bring them back! Bring them back to me! The game continued on as usual, not responding to the man at all. He heard voices. Hundreds of them. He turned around from his seat, looking behind him and standing in a small room. Children. Many children. Some with no eyes. Some with rings around their throats. Some burned across their bodies. Reaching towards him. Come follow me, said a voice. The lead detective looked over, and in the corner of his room, next to his old desk, was Sasuke. He stood in the corner, tall, handsome, clean. A smile was on his face, stretching. His smile was on his face. Come follow me. The lead detective jumped up, stepping back, trying to force away the children crawling towards him, reaching out for the game that was held within his hands. What's going on here? What's going on? Where's my family? Chompski smiled generously. I'll show you. I'll help you get away from them, you see. Just follow me. Chompski reached down and opened a drawer on the old desk. The lead detective, pushing through the crowd of children, trying to get away, looked inside. Sitting there, covered in dust, his old revolver from when he was on the force. He hadn't used that gun in many years and had put it away, not wanting to remember the things that he had done with it. But right now, he didn't see it as something that just caused pain or that killed. It was shining. It was light. It was something that could set him free. Just follow me, said Chompski, picking up the gun, putting it into the detective's hand. He formed his hand to hold the gun, then brought it up to his temple. So easy. That's all. The lead detective turned around. The children, crawling at him, grabbing his legs, pulling at him. They reached for the game. He turned back towards Chompski and smiled. For my family, I'll follow you. It was a few days before the body was discovered. It lay on the floor, blood all around. The detective's brain spread across the wall. In one hand held an empty gun, and in the other was a classic Game Boy with Pokemon Red. The battery had long died, and only an empty black screen was left. This was the final murder that the remaining authorities would allow. The cartridges were burned, making sure that not a single one survived. However, the code that is passed from game to game, even to other language versions, still exists. If you have an old Pokemon game, you can still place the cartridge in the back of the classic Game Boy, turn on the system, and roll the wheel. Who knows? Maybe you'll learn the secret for yourself.
Does anyone remember Pokemon Green? Not referring to the Japanese game with Venusaur on the box, I mean the one sold in American stores with Scyther on the front. I seem to be the only one who remembers this game. I wish I never encountered it in the first place. It all started in 1998 when Pokemon made its way to the United States with Pokemon Blue and Red. I was only 7 years old. A friend of mine had let me borrow his copy of Blue, and from that moment forward, I was addicted to the series. When the time came, I was reluctant to return the game to him, but I did. For the next few days, all I could talk about was the game. And as a kid, your whole world can revolve around a simple game, like Pokemon. I ended up helping my dad with yard work a few days before my birthday, and I couldn't help but talk his ear off about Pokemon. To my surprise, he said, "Get in the car, we're going to Walmart." Was he really about to purchase me my own copy of Pokemon? I was incredibly excited. This was one of the best days of my life, but well, it would also be one of my worst. We arrived at Walmart, and my father told me that this would be an early birthday gift, and I could only keep it if I behaved myself and did all my chores. I would have done anything to get my hands on a copy of Pokemon. We went inside and made our way to the video game section, and there it was, sprawled across the shelves in a beautiful fashion, Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue, and Green. I had never heard of Pokemon Green, but the Scyther on the front cover enticed me, and I had to have it. I grabbed a copy, checked out at the register, and went home, as happy as could be. That happiness wouldn't last. When I arrived at my house, I ran upstairs to my room, tore apart the box, and took the cartridge out. The cartridge was very odd. I assumed it would have a normal picture of a normal Scyther on it, just as the box did, but instead the Scyther was offset to the right, almost as if it was battling something that wasn't there. And it was almost glowing. The background was black, and underneath the Pokemon logo, it didn't say green version, as I had expected. As unsettled as this had made me feel, I placed the cartridge into my Game Boy. I turned it on and found that instead of viewing an intro, like in blue, it immediately brought me to a screen with only one choice. Continue. Where was New Game? I wasn't too disappointed. My overwhelming curiosity compelled me to click Continue, and I did. After a few moments, I found my character in what I assumed was my home. I tried to walk outside, but to my dismay, I couldn't exit the house. There were no stairs, and I couldn't interact with any of the objects in the room. The heck? I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, realizing that my cartridge might be broken, and I may not be able to play this amazing game after all. I shut my Game Boy off, took the cartridge out, blew on it, and put it back in. It brought me to the same screen, with the same option, Continue. I clicked on Continue, and it brought me to the same room. I tried shutting it off and blowing on the cartridge a few more times before I finally became too frustrated and I gave up. What the hell was going on? I told my dad about the game, and he took a look at it. He was brought to the same screen, same room. And he, as well as I, could not escape this room. He saw the torn up box on the floor, and he sighed. Well, we can't return it now. To my surprise, he then said, I'll have to get you a new one tomorrow. I became incredibly happy once more, and I gave my dad the biggest hug I had ever given him in my life. Though disappointed in the game that I received, I was glad to have the opportunity to get another one. The next day, my father and I proceeded to Walmart. We walked over to the video game section, and a lot of the Pokemon games were gone. Half blue, most of red, and all green had apparently been sold. There weren't even shelves anymore where Pokemon Green had been. Wow, I thought to myself, green must be popular. I wasn't upset. I wasn't intending on purchasing another copy of Green anyhow, seeing as it didn't work so well the last time. This time I grabbed Red, and I had already played Blue and attempted to play Green, so this time I wanted to try something new. We went home, I ran upstairs, I opened the box carefully, in case we had to return this one, and I took the red cartridge out. I placed it in my Game Boy and played. For hours. I played Pokemon Red until the sun came up the next morning. To this day, Red is my favorite of the Pokemon games, and is a great childhood memory. As for Green, I put it in a drawer and I forgot about it until many years later. It was May of 2007, and I received a copy of Pokemon Pearl for the Nintendo DS. My dad, knowing how much I loved this series, bought me it, out of the blue, knowing how happy I'd be. Thank you so much, I exclaimed. Before my dad could even respond, I ran next door to my friend Billy's house, and I showed him. What? What? He said. My mom just bought me Diamond. Apparently, my dad and Billy's mom had planned this for a week, without the two of us catching on. Without another word, we started to play. We felt like kids again. And after many hours, we stopped playing and decided to relive our childhoods and talk about the original generation of Pokemon. My favorite will always be Pokemon Red, I stated. Blue for me, said Billy. I recalled my first time playing Red. And then I remembered something that I hadn't thought about in years. The game that I had played before Red, or at least tried to, Pokemon Green. What about Green? I asked Billy. Did you ever play that one? Billy looked confused. Very funny. No, I was confused. What do you mean, very funny? Billy looked displeased. You and I both know there's no such thing as Pokemon Green. Yeah, there is, I said. He now realized I wasn't joking. He was further confused. What are you talking about? To my understanding, up until this point, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Green came out at the same time, in 1998. It soon became overshadowed by Pokemon Red and Blue, and this is why I hadn't heard much about Green since my younger years. This is what I had thought, at least. According to Billy, the biggest Pokemon expert I know, Pokemon Green doesn't exist, at least not an American one, with Scyther on the front. Determined to prove Billy wrong, I invited him over to my house and brought him to my room, where I would show him my copy of Pokemon Green. I dug through the drawers of my desk and eventually turned them upside down in my efforts, only to be let down. Where is it? I distinctly remember putting it in my desk drawer when I was younger. See, Billy said, Green doesn't exist. You probably dreamt it up or something. Billy went home. But I kept searching and searching, only to tear my room apart for nothing. Pokemon Green was gone. The following day, I woke up, jumped out of bed, brushed my teeth, and continued downstairs. There I found my father with a large breakfast waiting for me, the usual Sunday. We ate and indulged in some small talk and things about sports, weather. I decided that maybe I should ask my dad about the game, so I did. Oh, that old thing? Oh yeah. I took it from your room soon after I bought you the new one and tried to return it without the package. They tried to lie to me and say they didn't sell that game there, and I gave them a what for and stormed out. They could have just told me they needed the box. Anyway, I think it's on my dresser upstairs. I'll go get it. As my dad made his way to his room, I thought to myself, Billy said the game doesn't exist, and Walmart said that they never carried it in their store. This is beginning to make me feel uneasy. Lo and behold, my father came down the stairs and handed me the game, the one that I'd been searching for. Pokemon Green. I felt an unnerving but overwhelming need to attempt to play the game once more, so I grabbed my Game Boy from my room and proceeded to play. I would have had Billy dissect the game with me, but he's usually at church with his family around this time. I was alone in my efforts. The game started the way it normally did, with the nothing but continue to choose from. I chose so and found my character in the same room, trapped. This time around, being older, I was able to pay attention to more detail. Maybe now I could find a way out. I decided to hit start, see if there's any Pokemon. In my party was a Scyther. Not that surprising. Level 25, and knowing only the moves Strength, Cut, and Flash. Does Scyther even learn all those moves? I ventured to my items, only to find nothing. And to my trainer stats, only to find that I had no money, badges, and 0 hours clocked in, which is impossible. If I hadn't already crossed the threshold of weird, well, I certainly had now. I gave the room a good once-over to see if I could spot anything that I missed as a child. And to my delight, I did. There was a boulder in the room. As a kid, I probably would have thought that it was a chair or something, considering I'd never really played Pokemon before. The boulder was on the right side of the room, against the wall. Naturally, I had a Scyther who could use Strength, and I was able to move it. I walked up to the spot on the wall that the boulder was in, and I hit A. A text block came up and said, dark. Every time I hit A, it would just say dark. What the hell was happening? I thought for a second I remembered that Scyther knew Flash. I used it near the wall where the boulder had been. A path became lit. A surprisingly miraculous exit had been found. I grew less unnerved and more excited as I walked this almost endless hallway that was just big enough for my character to squeeze through. I finally came to a literal light at the end of my tunnel, as if I had exited a cave rather than a house. I walked through, and where did it bring me? I ended up on the side of my house. It would look to be like Pallet Town. Mind you, my house looked to be of normal size, void of any protruding extrusions on the side where the hallway would have been. This is odd, but I just shrugged and kept playing. There was also no way to get back into the house, seeing as there was no doors. I walked around a bit, found that there was no doors on any of the buildings. It was a ghost town, aside from what looked like Professor Oak standing in front of his lab where the door should have been. I tried talking to him, but a text box came up every time with just ... This made me feel on edge, but I marched on. The only logical thing left to do was head up to Viridian City, so I started towards the grass, but before I could even touch the grass, Professor Oak came up from behind me. What do you think you're doing? It's too dangerous for you and your Pokemon. Battle sequence started. Was I really gonna battle Professor Oak? Sure enough, I was. The sprite of Oak was strange. He was looking down at the ground, and the expression on his face made him look as though he was troubled somehow. Oak sent out a level 5 Squirtle, and I obviously sent out my level 25 Scyther. The Squirtle sprite looked the same as Oak, troubled, looking down. I beat it quickly, and Oak said, "Don't go!" Then he sent out, unsurprisingly, a troubled level 5 Charmander. I beat him quickly as well. Oak restated, "Don't go!" He then sent out none other than a level 25 and equally troubled Bulbasaur. I finished him off, and the battle was over. But not before Oak came on the screen one last time to say, "Don't go." Professor Oak stayed there, near the grass, silent. As I walked off towards Viridian City, once he was out of sight, a text box popped up, probably from Oak, with the words, "I beg of you, do not leave. You won't be able to return." Unmoved by Oak's words, but unnerved by the creepiness of what I was now convinced was a hack game, I pressed on towards Viridian City. Before I could reach my destination, the light illuminating my way disappeared. It became darker and darker until it was just pitch black. Just as it became pitch black, I ran into a wild Pokemon. From this point forward, I will refer to this Pokemon simply as the Invisible. It was level 100 and had no sprite or name. I was unable to fight it because every time I would choose one of Scyther's moves, it would just say, "Scyther is too scared to move." I would run away from the battle and attempt to move, but I would find myself running into Invisible again, before I could even take a step. I was stuck. This happened about another 5 times before I finally decided to stay still and think. What if I use Flash? I had Scyther use Flash, only to find my path to Viridian City dimly lit with a dark green tint. I continued, and the Invisible seemed to have vanished. I finally made it to Viridian City, or at least a dark green, dimly lit version. As soon as I stepped foot into the town, a text box popped up that said, "Viridian City. Stay forever and enjoy the gym." The hell? Stay forever? Enjoy the gym? I tried walking back from where I'd came, but there was an invisible wall. I tried walking forward, only to find another invisible wall at the tip of the town. Oak was right. I could neither return nor leave Viridian City. I calmed down a bit and explored the town, and much like Pallet, the buildings had no doors except for the gym. The only person in town was an old man who teaches you how to catch Pokemon. Avoiding the old man, whom I'd found creepy even in the normal Pokemon games, I tried the gym. It was locked. I walked around the town, and inevitably, I had to talk to the old man to progress. Reluctantly, I did so. "Hey, so you want to catch Pokemon, do you? You want to become a Pokemon Master? Defeat the powerful trainers of the Pokemon League? Enjoy an endless life of solitude?" I was given the choice, yes or no. Endless life of solitude? I chose no. "Well then, stay forever and enjoy the gym." The hell? I can't enjoy a locked gym. I spoke to him again and found the same exact script, only this time I chose yes. He said, "Well then, you're well on your way to becoming what you always wanted to be, but first, come with me. I'll introduce you to a true Pokemon Master." He walked me to the gym and stood near the entrance. I tried to speak with him again, but it wouldn't work. I guess he won't be introducing me to anyone. I tried the gym once more. This time I could walk in. I was slightly nervous, but thought to myself, it's only a hack game, made by some mentally unstable game freak worker or something. Only part of me believed that, while the rest of me believed this game was more sinister than that. I hope it wasn't the latter. I found my character inside darkness. The gym was pitch black. I had Scyther use Flash, and the room became dimly lit with a dark green tint, as I expected. The gym was nothing like the complicated maze it was in Red. Here it was just a small room. At the tip of the room was what looked like Giovanni. I walked over to him and hit the A button. He said, "Unfortunately, this is where your Pokemon journey ends. There's nothing beyond this point, and you will remain in this room forever. I'm sorry." What? That's it? Can't be. I walked around the room multiple times and tried leaving, but alas, I could not. I sat there disappointed. As creepy as the game was, I felt such a strong need to finish it. After a few moments, I tried to speak to Giovanni again. This time he simply said, "I'm sorry." Every time I spoke to him, that's all he would say. "I'm sorry." I tried talking to him from the side, but it didn't work. I even tried talking to him from behind, in a space right before the wall at the end of the room. He turned and said, "I'm sorry. I truly am." A battle sequence started. Finally. Productiveness. Giovanni has no choice. Came up the text box as opposed to Giovanni wants to fight. This was weird, but I brushed it off just like every other weird thing in the game. The battle started. Giovanni sent out, is all the next text box said, and the Pokemon he sent out was none other than the Invisible at level 100. I once again sent out Scyther against what I could only assume was a Pokemon. This time, I could actually fight. Every time the Invisible used a move, it would just use ... and nothing would happen. Every time that I used Strength or Cut, it would miss. Every single time. So the battle was never going to end. Eventually I decided to use Flash. What happened next was quite unexpected. The invisible became visible. The Pokemon was none other than a Scyther, but a darker version, much like the dark green tint cast over the town. The sprite was also strange. I can only describe it as sinister, maybe evil looking, I guess. We fought. My moves didn't miss this time, but they did little damage to a level 100 Scyther. The dark version of my Pokemon now knew the moves of my Pokemon as well, and after using Cut twice, my Pokemon was defeated. Giovanni came on the screen and said once more, "I'm sorry." I was then back in the gym, even though my only Pokemon had fainted. I double-checked, and Scyther did in fact have 0 HP. I walked over to Giovanni and talked to him one last time. This is what he said. "You have to find a way out. He has control over all of us. You will only be another victim. There is a door." His sentence was cut off by an animation. The animation was of Scyther grabbing Giovanni from behind. I stared at the still image for a while. Giovanni looked so frightened that it made me sick to my stomach, and after maybe 3 minutes the image faded out. Now I was back at the gym. The room was the same, but Giovanni was gone. I tried to leave, but as soon as I reached the door, another animation started. It was the same as the last one, but instead of Giovanni in Scyther's grip, it was my Scyther. And now I was scared. After a few minutes, the animation played out and my Scyther was cut to pieces. Even in the low quality of the animation, it still instilled a great deal of fear into me. The animation ended and skipped into an image of Scyther's head, looking ever so frightened as it lay there in the darkness. And a text box popped up saying nothing more than, "You failed." Here the game froze. Disturbed, I slid the cartridge out of my Game Boy and threw it against the wall. I ran downstairs, poured myself a glass of water. After calming down, I called Billy and had him come over. I needed someone else to experience this. Needless to say, I was freaked out. But Billy came over rather quickly. "What is it? What happened?" I explained everything the best of my ability, and he just laughed. "Yeah, right," he said. I told him that I'd prove it. I ran upstairs, picked up the cartridge off the floor, and ran back downstairs to show it to him. He was unimpressed. "How long did it take you to make this?" I was still a little angry at this point. "I didn't make it! It's real! Play it, you'll see!" I handed him my Game Boy, and he put the cartridge in. He turned it on, but nothing happened. He took the cartridge out, he blew on it, but to no avail, it didn't work anymore. "I must have damaged it when I threw it against the wall." Billy laughed again. "Yeah, you had me going for a second." He then left and went home. While I sat there, still taking in what must have happened just moments before Billy arrived, I thought aloud. Giovanni said there was a door. Maybe I should have looked for it instead of trying to leave. Really, my thoughts were pointless because to this day, I can't get the cartridge to work. I wish I had looked for the door and avoided seeing that animation. In a way, it traumatized me. I haven't been the same since. As you can see, I still have the cartridge. Scanned it using the computer. See a close-up of the photo of what it looks like. It's a bit blurry, but it's the best I can do. The game is real. The game is real.
There are tons of stories out there about hacked Pokemon games, some of them really quite neat, such as the one about the version where you get a ghost as a starter. Some are ridiculous, silly stories about individuals dying after playing a game, or the game talking to them. God, don't these writers know less is more when it comes to these stories? I digress. I grew interested in these hacked games that are apparently in thrift stores on eBay or handed out by homeless people to random passers-by. I didn't have the pleasure of meeting these creepy people. I merely found this
particular cartridge in a trash bin, and the garbage truck backed into my neighborhood dumpster. I noticed the game and asked the trash man if I could take it. He didn't seem to mind. It was thrown away after all. I, of course, checked with my neighbor to confirm that they actually didn't want it, though they seemed perplexed as if they'd never seen it before in their life. Their son made a grab for it, a little boy who saw the Charizard on the cover, crying out, "Pokemon, I want Mommy!" But his mother told him no, seeing as I found it. And he didn't have a Game Boy anyway, he just liked Pokemon. Thinking nothing more, I simply went home, looking at the cartridge's sticker on the way. Just a plain old red version. The sticker torn slightly across the Charizard's neck. But that was expected with such an old game. I had blue version as a kid, so I was a bit eager to see the, albeit minimal, differences red and blue had. I was rather disappointed by what I saw when the title screen showed up. Pokemon Strangled Red version. Well, damn it. It was hacked. Hacks were neat and all, but they had zero monetary value. The original's quite valuable by now, and I wanted to play Red anyway, not this crap. Oh well. It was free. Might as well try it. The name was odd, however. Strangled Red? That made no sense. Not even in the morbid description of somebody being asphyxiated as people turn blue while choking, not red. Who knows? Maybe there was a pair of those hacks and I just got the red one. The more I thought about this, though, the more interested I became. My initial disappointment turned into curiosity. I wanted to know what the creator had made. I was going to note everything I saw. The first oddity I noticed was the start screen had a Charizard next to the trainer instead of a Charmander. Also, the Pokemon never cycled through like the original version did, it just stayed Charizard, even after 5 minutes of waiting. Shrugging, I hit start, noticing that there was no Charizard cry as I did, like there was supposed to be. I saw there was a continue option, so I figured I'd do what everyone did with used games and see what the previous owner had done. No. I blinked in surprise. No? What do you mean, no? The game wouldn't let me continue, no matter what. Though, on the fourth attempt, I heard the Charizard cry, quiet and barely audible. But there. Shrugging it off, I decided to just hit new game, like I would have done after checking the old file anyway. The screen cut to black for a while. No Professor Oak, no starting theme, just nothing at all. Eventually the screen came back, showing a bedroom, 2 beds, 2 TVs, and a computer in the room. My trainer sprite was the usual one, consistent with the old red version. I was curious as to why it didn't ask my name, though it was answered as I opened the pause menu, noticing my trainer was named Steven. No, this isn't my real name. Or some stupid crap like that. This game isn't self-aware or haunted, at least not that I know of. It's just a name chosen already. Curious, I saw that he had the starter amount of money. No badges. He didn't look like Red, though. His hair was longer, almost reaching halfway down his back. Red's usual smile, replaced with a confident smirk. Honestly, I found this sprite much cooler than Red. Next I checked out his Pokemon. A single Charmander, level 5, named Mickey. Nothing was odd about it, or should I say, her, with the name and all. She had beginning Charmander stats, only new Scratch and Tail Whip, basic stuff. The game seemed relatively normal. Returning to the game, I walked around the room, noticing Steven's long hair was present on the back of my trainer sprite when my back was turned to the camera. I didn't recognize the house, but I descended the stairs to see more. Downstairs was another trainer, who spoke to me the instant I came down. Mike. Ready yet? Steven. Yeah. I assumed Mike was my rival, pre-decided for me. A replacement of Blue, most likely, though I thought back to the bedroom having 2 beds, realizing they weren't just rivals, they were brothers. They talked back and forth, basic Pokemon dialogue, becoming a Pokemaster, catching them all, stuff like that. before having a little argument over which is better, Charmander or Squirtle. Which, of course, led to the introduction battle, like the one versus Blue in the lab. Simple enough. Scratch, tackle, till I won, purely for having the first turn. I took note of how much better Steven's sprite looks in combat than Red's. A different pose, his hair looking like it was blowing in the wind. A brief minor upgrade, but still, much nicer. I left the house after some more banter with my brother, stepping out to the Pallet Town theme. Going to the east, I found this was indeed Pallet Town. The house was simply on the outskirts of the west. I noted there was no mysterious grassy field like in the normal Pallet Town. Wandering about, I decided to check in on Red's home. His mother was inside, and when I talked to her, she commented on how handsome Steven looked, hoping her son would look up to him as a role model for when he became a trainer himself next year, which, of course, led me to realize this game took place a year before the original Pokemon. Red was even upstairs playing the SNES in his room, commenting, "I'm gonna be the best too when it's my turn." I was starting to like this hack. It was interesting. A completely new adventure, a different character. Hell, Steven even seemed to have like a history with the people in his town, a reputation, a personality, beyond a silent protagonist. The people in town talked to him as a person, making conversation, not just spouting tutorial crap. Even Blue's sister had a new dialogue. They seemed to be in a relationship too, as the dialogue ended with a kiss and a heart over her head. Professor Oaks simply wished me well, giving me a Pokedex to aid me in my adventure. He wasn't giving it to me to be reason behind the adventure like every other Pokemon game out there. He gave it to me out of kindness, something to help me on my way, a gift. I was liking this more and more with each second. The game seemed to have an actual story now. I was somebody, not just a cookie-cutter protagonist anyone could be, not just some blank sheet that could be replaced without notice. The story was different, though the actual gameplay remained unchanged. I went north, like I was supposed to. I went from town to town, collected badges, received the praise of the leaders. Steven's fame even seemed to spread, as some NPCs would talk like they knew him. I used Mickey for every battle. And she was growing surprisingly fast. She handled Brock with ease, even pounded Misty with no trouble at all. She wasn't as adversely affected by super effective attacks as others, did more damage than regular Charmanders. She was a veritable powerhouse. Even became a Charizard at the mere level of 25. Not bad at all, I must say. Things started to get weird, though, as soon as I reached Lavender Town. I know, Lavender Town is the focus behind every CreepyPasta story, and the like, but it was the only place that was noticeably different. There was no Team Rocket invasion, which I found odd, though I did remember that this was a year in the past, so the invasion wouldn't occur until Red's time. I tried to enter Pokemon Tower, aiming to get a Ghastly, but that's when it got odd. Steven, I have no reason to be here. Steven wouldn't go into Pokemon Tower, no matter what I did. This was weird. I mean, hell, there are a million places in Kanto that you really have no need to be, like random houses with nothing but children NPCs, for example. Why was it here that Steven wouldn't enter? With a shrug, I figured that I wouldn't need a Ghastly, seeing as Mickey could handle anything, so I simply went on my way. Lavender Town served no purpose other than a passageway with a Pokemon Center. The game progressed normally from there. The remaining gyms fell, and eventually I made my way to the Elite Four and defeated them. As with Blue, my brother, Mike, was there before me, initiating the championship battle, which Mickey swept with ease. The aftermath of the battle was quite pleasant. None of the tension that was present between Red and Blue, the end of their match. The brothers congratulated each other on their progress, and shook hands, before the screen went white. No Hall of Fame, nor any credits. When the screen came back, it was at the house again. The two brothers sitting at the computer. conversing with each other. Steven. I don't want to. Mike. Come on. I just gotta borrow her for a second, just to finish the Pokédex. The entry won't register unless she recognizes me as a master for just a second. Steven. But she's my Mickey. Mike. I promise I'll give her back. Come on. Please? Yes? No. I was a bit perplexed, so I hit no cautiously. Mike. Come on. Please? No. Mike. Come on. Please? I realized that this would simply continue to loop until I hit yes. So I did, just to see what would happen. Mike. All right, this will just take a second. Then we'll both be Pokemon Masters. Steven. The screen changed to the animation shown when two people trade Pokemon, which I found a bit weird seeing as I was solo, but whatever. This was apparently supposed to happen. Mickey went first. I watched lazily as she began to travel down the trading tube. That made me jump, the sudden noise resonating in my silent bedroom, loud due to the volume being way up. Looking at the screen, I noticed the game had seemed to freeze. Mickey still in mid-trade. But the game wasn't doing anything. With a sigh, I turned the game off, wondering when my last save was. When the game turned back on, I stared for a moment at the title screen. There was no Charizard next to the trainer. Upon pressing start, I saw the new game option was absent, leaving only continue. This was strange to say the least, so I selected it. The game started without even showing my stats as usual, and my jaw dropped at what I was greeted with. 1 year later. The Lavender Town theme came up first, playing its normal way, the screen slowly fading in from blackness. Steven was in the Pokemon Tower, which made the music even stranger, seeing as the town had its own theme. He was standing in front of a tombstone, not doing anything. Wondering what was going on, I pressed A. Steven. Confused, I tried walking, realizing I was indeed in control at the moment. I brought up the pause menu and checked my party. Mickey was gone. Not just Mickey, all Pokemon. He had nothing. The Pokédex was absent from the menu, his bag was empty. Honestly concerned now, I checked his trainer card. He had no money. He had no badges. His playtime was 8,795 hours, which was impossible as I had only 30 logged in before. This wasn't the strangest part. His picture. The picture of the handsome, confident young trainer was different. His eyes were blank. His face turned slightly down. That smirk was gone, replaced by a lack of any expression at all. That long hair of his, before in a perfect perm, was now messy and unkempt. I couldn't look at him anymore. Closing the menu, I went to move out of the tower, but with every step I took away from the tombstone, the screen flickered like it did when a Pokemon was poisoned. Gulping, I brought up the trainer card again. His picture was getting worse. Every step I took, he hung his head more and more. His shoulders slumped, he bent over. By the time I had exited the tower, he was on his knees. Hands to his face, hair draped across him. I had guessed already what was going on, but this clinched it. I began to put some things together in my mind. I had always wondered why there was no champion in the original games besides your rival. Why is it you, the protagonist, had to beat your rival when he just waltzed in, no previous champion, to challenge? And then it struck me. The answer was right here. The previous champion gave up. His precious Mickey was apparently dead. And with her, so died part of him. His Pokedex, the other Pokemon, his badges, his fame, all of it, he threw it away. In that year, the year that I missed, the year where all those hours came from. I even did the math. I mean, there's 8,765 hours in a year. Add that to my 30 from before, and it matched up. Even so, the game kept going. This should have been an ending, I thought. I mean, what else is there to do? I have no Pokedex, no Pokemon, no nothing. What was I supposed to be doing? I talked to everyone in town, but they all said similar things. Are you okay? Still mourning, I see. Everything will be all right. Please, is there anything we can do? Stephen never replied to them, and they all simply said the same thing over and over. I couldn't put the game down now. This was all so strange. Curious, I headed off into the tall grass and eventually got into a battle with Rattata. No Pokemon was sent out, just Stephen's sprite. I was wondering how I'd battle. Wild Rattata left you be. The battle ended without anything happening. This was certainly interesting, and it happened with every Pokemon I encountered. Wild Pidgey ignored you. Wild Ponyta wandered off. The music never changed either, no matter where I went. Lavender Town came from the speakers, following me. Sometimes slowed down slightly, sometimes not. I searched everywhere, every town, talked to everybody, wondering just what the hell I needed to do. My frustration was mixing with the depressing atmosphere of all this, making the experience altogether unnerving and uncomfortable. But I couldn't tear myself away. I was starting to get a bit angry, though. Nobody telling me anything besides giving me their condolences and trying to give me items like lemonade or coffee. Each met with Stephen. No. I slapped myself for idiocy, suddenly realizing how the likely answer was right in front of me. Pallet Town, of course. When I went there, though, which took a long time, having to walk, no Pokemon to fly with, no bicycle to ride, and Stephen only seeming to move half the regular movement speed, it wasn't much different. I first tried talking to Professor Oak. These things happen. You were just unlucky. Next tried Blue's sister. Please, don't leave home again. Red's mother wouldn't even talk to me at all. With nowhere else to go, I walked to the west, finding the house from the beginning, which I had never entered since leaving Pallet Town. Inside was Mike, but talking to him was just useless. Mike, I'm so sorry. I pondered for a moment if this was really the ending. Stephen doomed to do nothing but roam Kanto in misery, haunted by the memories, forced to listen to everyone's concerns about him. As a last-ditch effort to do anything, I went to the bedroom and walked over the bed. Stephen, I'm going to sleep. The screen faded to black for a moment, but then slowly faded back in. The world having a black tint to it. The Mike sprite, laying in the other bed. I assumed this meant that it was night.
Steven, I'm going to do it. Do what? Again, I have no idea. Tried inspecting everything in the room, and nothing happened. As soon as I left the house, another dialogue box. Steven, it can bring her back. It can do anything. What the hell was it? Something that could do anything. I couldn't for the life of me figure it out. Wandering about, I tried to leave Pallet Town the usual way. Steven, not that way. He wouldn't go any further. I tried the homes. Steven, screw them. I quirked my eyebrows at that, forgetting for a moment that this was not a real Pokemon game. The vulgarity just took me off guard. I continued to look around, but there was nowhere I could go until I accidentally stepped on the ocean, and Steven walked right in, until the upper half of his sprite, visible, like the swimmers you encounter in the Cerulean Gym. I didn't know he could swim. Steven, the missing one. Missing one? I paused for a moment. No, he couldn't possibly mean that. I hadn't tried the missing no trick on this hack yet, but it just fit too well that had to be what he meant. I surfed all the way towards Cinnabar. I began to feel something was off, more so than this already was. Silence. The lavender theme had stopped. There was no noise at all. Nor were there any Pokemon. I just kept going, finding Cinnabar and surfing up and down the east coast. Lo and behold, Wild Missing No appeared. Steven, mine. Wild Missing No was caught. What the hell? Steven didn't do anything. He just commanded that atrocity of broken data to join him. No. Become his possession. And it did. I was getting more and more disturbed by all this. Checking the start menu, I saw Missing No was not in my party, but instead an item, making things even stranger. I checked the trainer card as well. Steven has his back to me, his long hair draped behind him, his hands in his pockets. Nothing else. Remembering what he said at the start of this night, I realized what I had to do. I surfed to land and made my way northeast to... where else? Lavender Town. Along the way, I noticed all the trainers, oddly still out at this hour, wouldn't look at Steven. All of them turning when he passed, and even those that were normally static. I tried talking to one of the officers in the guardhouse. Just go. They all said the same thing, though one sent chills down my spine. Sometimes, dead is best. My hands were sweating at this point. Steven was about to try the impossible, something some would see as a crime against nature, which many of these people shared that opinion. I steeled myself. It's just a game, and I was going to complete it. It took an eternity to reach Pokemon Tower, but I got there eventually, taking a deep breath and heading towards the tombstone. I remembered which one. The image of Steven sitting before it was burned into my mind after all. First, I tried inspecting it. Steven. Mickey. Nothing happened. With a gulp, I opened the menu and selected Missing No from the bag. Oak. Steven, don't use it! I was reminded when Professor Oak would magically tell you that you couldn't use a key item somewhere, like when using the bicycle in a building, though the message this time was different. Even worse,
Stephen responded to it. Stephen, in a world that cheated me, why should I play fair? Stephen used it. Obtained. What in God's name did I obtain? I couldn't tell you. Because the game took away my control. Without my input, Stephen began to leave the tower on his own, walking single step by single step. The Lavender Town started again. As he left the town and began his excruciatingly slow journey against my will, every time he crossed one of the borders where the music would change, it got progressively slower, more and more disturbing. By the time he reached Cerulean City, it was a demonic rumbling. I was just staring, watching him, trying to guess where he was going, but it was getting more and more obvious. He was heading to Pallet Town. The music had all but stopped when he got there, playing single note by single note. He went exactly where I had guessed. Right to his own house, inside and up the stairs. At this point, there was no music. Stephen moved step by step, stopping at his brother's bed, turning to face him. At first, I thought the game froze. He didn't do anything, just simply stood there. I couldn't move him. I did, however, find out I could use the pause menu. I was terrified to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I selected the trainer card. There was a low growl noise, like a distorted Pokemon cry. Stephen was looking at me again, directly at the screen. He was hunched over, his bangs obscuring his face. His hair was wild and feathered out. Between his bangs, there wasn't even a face at all, just black. 2 red eyes looking straight forward, a white grin contrasting with the darkness. That wasn't all. His name was now Nefes? I couldn't look away. My eyes glued to his, not breaking contact for some time. My vision was getting blurry until I couldn't see very well. My face grew wet. I was crying. Like a baby. There was nothing I could do to hold back the tears. I was with this boy from the start. I built him up to greatness, and was then forced to watch his decline after a tragic accident, and now he was this thing, this abomination. I watched him go insane. Halting my tears, wiping my eyes, I closed out of the trainer card and tried to save the game, wanting to just quit. The game informed me that this was impossible. Nothing can be saved now. The pause menu wouldn't close no matter what I did. So with no other option, I checked the bag. Nothing. I checked Pokemon. And there was one. A single sprite met me. It had 0 HP, its status, dead. Its name. I'm missing. I selected it, and I was greeted with 4 options. Status. It's her. Switch. Never. Close. No. Strangle. My fingers shaking. I selected Strangle. In the menu closed, showing Stephen in the room again. Nefes? Goodbye. The game shut itself off. I was more dumbfounded than frightened. In a bit of shock, I turned it back on, and the title screen showed the Manic 7 and a horrible glitched Charizard. I pressed start and continue. All I saw was a zoomed out view of Pallet Town showing Stephen's house to the west. Tall grass surrounding it, those unmovable stones blocking it from the rest of the town. The image was completely static. No music. No movement. Before fading to white, going back to the title screen. It was as it had been when I first popped it in. A trainer and a Charizard. I attempted to hit continue. No.
This was based on an entry in a journal found on the side of the road outside of a small mental institution in Pennsylvania. It appeared to have been thrown from one of the second-story windows. I found no other website more fitting to post what I've read. Believe what you will. I've always been a fan of the strange and the mysterious, especially in the world of video games. I used to be obsessed with reading video game rumors, like the Triforce in the Ocarina of Time or catching Mew in Pokemon Red and Blue. I even started playing Pokemon hacks due to their odd and amusing qualities. The following is my first-hand account on a game that I encountered titled Pokemon Fuchsia for the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. I'm writing this purely to describe the game to the reader. My purpose is simple. I'm calling out to anyone who knows anything about this game, or anyone who actually in fact has the game in their possession, as I no longer do. I cannot stress enough how important it is for you, the reader, to tell me anything that you might know about Pokemon Fuchsia, so I can find it and destroy it. The next few paragraphs or so, I'm not sure how long it will take me to explain, should inform you as to why my request is so adamant. My account starts as early as this year, March 3rd, 2013 to be precise. I remember the date because it was just one day prior to my 22nd birthday. Little did I know, my birthday would not be enjoyed, even in the slightest. I would spend it confined, within my bedroom, but trapped, figuratively speaking, in a video game. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's just a little hard to write this while the thoughts of what I'm attempting to put in plain words still haunt me, as they do every day. I was spending the day with my friend Anne. We had been best friends since we were little, but as of right now, we have not spoken since our awful experience with the game. We probably won't speak ever again. Anyhow, we were at the local mall, and to my apprehension, she was looking for something to get me for my birthday. Though I had tried to persuade her to keep her money, she was unbendable on the matter. If only I had tried harder. We came across a small pawn shop near the food court that specialized in old video games. Now, I tried to hide my delight when we were walking into the shop, but Anne had already noticed the look in my eye. "Oh, come on," she said, knowing this is where she would find my gift. "All right, Anne, but I probably won't find anything that I'll like." I was lying through my teeth, for her wallet's sake. We strolled over to the glass case in the shop containing nothing but old Game Boy games. I saw some of my favorites, Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, Crystal, and... Huh? I noticed a Game Boy Advance cartridge that had a purplish tint to it, with a faint hint of red. I'd never seen that Pokemon game, I uttered to Anne. She could tell I was bewildered, and she had the man behind the counter open the case. We took a closer look at the cartridge. I read it aloud. Pokemon Fuchsia version. What the hell? There wasn't even a Pokemon on the front like a normal Pokemon game should have been, just a swirl of purples and reds. Anne noticed that I was intrigued, and without a moment's notice, she swiped the game out of my hand and went up to the counter to pay for it. I normally would have stopped her from spending her money, but I really wanted to play that game. It was clearly a hacked cartridge, but I knew I would enjoy it whether it was a decent hack, or it was so bad that it made me chuckle. Either way, I had to have it. After thanking Anne for my gift, and parting ways with her, I drove home excited to play Pokemon Fuchsia. I couldn't help but stare at the cartridge sitting there in the passenger seat. The swirl of colors was almost mesmerizing. Before I knew it, I could hear the loud sounds of swerving vehicles and car horns. I looked up to notice that I was driving on the wrong side of the road. I quickly adjusted my car and kept driving. I looked at my surroundings and noticed that I was almost home. What? That should have taken me at least half an hour. I looked back at the clock and noticed that almost a half an hour had passed since I had left the mall. How long had I been staring at that game? I shrugged off the event, knowing that dwelling on it would only make me feel paranoid. I arrived home a few minutes later. I threw my keys on the table and headed to my room. I grabbed my old Game Boy that I'd had since I was 12. I positioned Pokemon Fuchsia into the back and powered it up. I couldn't help but feel a little excited, but also anxious at the same time, remembering what happened in the car. I thought that it somehow had something to do with the game. See what I mean about feeling paranoid? Anyway, the screen loaded up to the Game Freak logo. Frozen. No star animation, no sound, nothing. I sat there for a minute and the game finally brought me to the new game option. I clicked on it and eagerly awaited to see just what Pokemon Fuchsia was. It brought me to a normal beginning with Oak explaining the world of Pokemon. Only instead of Oak, it was Koga, Fuchsia's city gym leader. Oh, I see, I exclaimed to myself. I couldn't believe that it had taken me this long to realize why it was called Pokemon Fuchsia. It was obviously a hack focusing on Fuchsia City. This may in fact be interesting. If I'd only known how interesting it would turn out to be. Koga explained the world of Pokemon, almost word for word like it's explained by Professor Oak in Pokemon Red and Blue. I say almost because at the end of his lecture, he says the following. Remember though, you can't always hide from the bad things in this world. You have to learn to fight your way out. Pokemon are meant to wage war in our honor, and for the sake of keeping us out of harm's way. This is their purpose. This is why they were made. I found this a little odd, to say the least, especially the words, this is why they were made. Made? What did he mean by that? Keeping his words in mind, I continued. I named my character like normal, and chose my gender. I was then placed inside my room, also like normal. I went downstairs and saw what I assumed was my mom. My assumption turned out to be false when I pressed the A button to talk to her. The text box read, Janine. Hi, sweetie. Are you ready for your big day? You do remember what today is, right? I was offered a choice of yes or no, so I clicked no. Janine, today's your big showdown with my dad, silly, remember? Just because he doesn't approve of our relationship doesn't mean that you have to be worried. He's strong, but you can take him. I believe in you. That's right. Janine is Koga's daughter. I seem to be dating her in this game. So far, I was liking this hack, but why did I have to battle Koga this early in the game? And with what Pokemon? I hit start and looked to see if I had any Pokemon, and luckily I did. A level 40 Nidoking and a level 40 Nidoqueen. This was odd to start the game off with, but I was happy with the lineup. I went outside and, unsurprisingly, I found myself in Fuchsia City. I wandered around and found that it looked exactly the same as the Fuchsia City I remembered as a kid, except for the fact that my house from Pallet Town was also there. I talked to the townsfolk, only to be greeted with distaste. They all said hateful things to me, like Koga is going to put you in your place, or I hope Koga teaches you a lesson. Clearly, Koga had the entire town against me. I could only guess that he really didn't like me dating his daughter. So far, the hack had aroused my curiosity, but it was quite peculiar, to say the least. I finally made my way to the gym and went inside. The gym was no more than a small room, devoid of anything material or living. Anything, that is, except for who I could only assume was Koga, standing at the tip of the room. I walked over and hit A to engage in battle, but to no avail. Koga said, I have no interest in battling you until you know the truth about Pokemon. Go to the Safari Zone library and learn before you fight. Safari Zone library? Strange. I left the gym and went to the Safari Zone. Inside, there were 2 doors, and in between them was a sign that read, Safari Zone left, Safari Zone library right. I walked over to the right and into the library like Koga had instructed. I must say, I was intrigued. The room looked like a Pokemart, only larger. The aisles were composed of books instead of Poke products. There was a book in the corner of the room where the cashier normally would have been. With every room, there was more shelves, more books, and more doors. It was endless. Every time I would try to read a book from one of the shelves, a text box would pop up saying, you can't read these. With every room, every shelf, every book and every text box. I became more and more motivated to press on and figure out just what was going on. Eventually, I came to a final room. There were no aisles and no books. There was just a man in the center of the room. He looked like one of those random sprites from Oak's lab. I went over to him and pressed the A button. He simply said, "Come with me." Come with him where? There were no doors left. Where were we going? The screen faded to black and the two of us appeared in another doorless room with not even an exit. There was machinery and computers all around. It was reminiscent of Bill's house in Cerulean City, but more detailed. I could see how the person responsible for this hack cartridge created the game, and I applauded him for his work. At least at this point I did. It was enjoyable at the time, and left me wanting more. Always theorizing what would come next, because at this point, Pokemon Fuchsia didn't make much sense. Much like reading the beginning of a good mystery novel. If only I had left it a mystery. The lab sprite fiddled around on the largest computer in the room, and then walked over to me. He said, "This is where Pokemon are created." I was nothing short of shocked when I read the statement, and I became even more interested in Pokemon Fuchsia. It had the potential to be even better than a normal Pokemon game. The lab sprite continued on, although it wasn't always this way. This town is Koga's passion, and he would stop at nothing to keep it from any sort of demise. Years ago, when the Safari Zone was at its peak of popularity, it soon became apparent that it would, well, run out of Pokemon. Koga could not have this. It was the only thing bringing people to Fuchsia City, a place that he himself founded to start a life with his daughter after her mother passed away. I think the creator of this game was laying on Koga's backstory a little thick, but I read on. Working with Professor Oak and myself, Koga spent 2 long years trying to create Pokemon, and just as the Safari Zone was going under, he succeeded. The detail that this game was going into just at the beginning was impressive. He continued, "Have you ever noticed that the Pokemon in the Safari Zone can't be caught anywhere else? That's because they aren't anywhere else. These Pokemon were created here. The first one we created was Scyther, followed by Tauros, and the list goes on. However, Koga soon became obsessed with the idea of creating Pokemon for his own personal agenda, becoming the most powerful trainer there ever was." Okay, so this is as much as I could remember word for word. I have a photographic memory, but this game went into too much detail. The next million paragraphs explained that Professor Oak originally created all the Pokemon, and this is why it only took 2 years for him, the lab guy, and Koga to do so again. Koga became abnormally power hungry and forced Oak to recreate every Pokemon, only more powerful. He did so after years and years of hard, relentless work, but the problem with creating such strong Pokemon is that they become too power hungry. These Pokemon were killers, and ended up killing the original Pokemon population within a year. Very few trainers could control such malicious creatures, and that's why Koga and my character are the only trainers left. In a sense, though, the game never put it into words. Koga ruled the Pokemon world. I think Fuchsia City was the only town left, and everyone there is too scared to cross him. When he hates something, they hate the same thing, such as me. Despite the absurdly long dialogue, I was developing quite the fascination with this odd but engaging storyline. The creator chose an oddball town and gym leader as the focus for his narrative. This made the story refreshingly original. Koga started with a commendable motive for his actions, but quickly lost his way and began creating Pokemon to fight for him, making him the most feared individual in the Pokemon world. If you will, it was also vaguely believable, considering the hard-headed nature of Koga in the original Pokemon games. I liked it. Later on, I would learn to hate it. What I perceived to be the next morning, I woke to the sound of a loud knocking on my apartment door. I didn't even remember going to bed. I jumped up and ran to see who it was. I opened the door and there was Anne, looking very upset but relieved when she saw me. There you are, what the hell? You haven't answered your texts or calls in over 2 weeks. I looked at her for a moment with a touch of anger in my eyes and remembered her. What are you talking about? We were hanging out yesterday at the mall. Anne looked astonished. That was more than 2 weeks ago. What's going on? Are you on drugs? Anne didn't seem to be joking, even in the slightest. I picked up my cell phone and noticed almost 100 texts and 22 missed calls. I then checked the date. It had indeed been over 2 weeks. I had apparently slept through my birthday, and many days after that. What the fuck? I immediately asked Anne to take me to the doctor. And cutting to the chase, we found nothing wrong with me. Anne brought me home after I nearly had a panic attack, wondering what had happened. And then that was that. I called my job and explained everything. They understood, and I relaxed. And then I remembered the game. Maybe that'll get my mind off things, I thought to myself. I went to my room, grabbed the game, and continued playing. The last thing I remember was the lab guy explaining everything to me in the doorless room. As soon as I started the game up, without so much as a Game Freak logo or New Game Continue screen, it took me to a flashback of what I had done up to this point. Much like Fire Red and Leaf Green, there were multiple cutscenes of my character losing to Koga. I didn't recall fighting him whatsoever. Then again, I didn't remember anything that happened to me over the past 2 weeks. I was very unnerved, but I kept watching to see what else I had done. After what must have been my 10th loss to Koga, it revealed my character walking to a building adjacent to the Safari Zone, walking inside and meeting what looked like Professor Oak. The next scene showed my character stepping into a machine in the corner of Oak's home, like the one in Bill's house in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, and then reappearing outside of a cave in the middle of what looked like a red ocean, or lava maybe. It displayed my character walking into the cave, fighting with a glitch Pokemon called EXP1. It looked like missing now and capturing it. The next scene showed me fighting Koga and winning. The last scene depicted my character taking Koga's place in the gym. Everyone in the town was there before me. It then showed an unsettling animation of my character's sprite with a menacing smile on his face. It would appear that my character was the new tyrant in town. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. There was only one way to find out how this had happened. I had to keep playing. I found my character in the gym, right where the cutscenes had left off. I walked outside and immediately noticed that something was off. There was no one around. I tried to walk into some of the houses, but all of the doors were locked. I walked over to my house, and luckily, I was able to get in. I went inside and talked to Janine. All she could say was... ... I wasn't exactly getting to the bottom of anything. I thought about the cutscenes for a second, and then recalled EXP1. I looked at my party. Nidoking and Nidoqueen were gone, and in their place was the odd Missingno-like Pokemon. It had no stats, no moves, and no levels. Only its name and its glitchy appearance. This was strange. I then remembered the building near the Safari Zone. I ventured to its entrance, and to my satisfaction, it too was unlocked. I walked inside and talked to Oak. This is what he said. What have I done? I should have never sent you to that place. I put that Pokemon there for a reason. Its evil nature has consumed you. It was the first Pokemon I'd ever created, and it was a failed experiment. I should have never created it in the first place. When you asked for a Pokemon that could defeat Koga, it was the only one that I could think of. I thought that maybe if you could defeat him, you could restore this world to its original luster. This is much worse. You are much worse. The thing you caught in that cave, the thing I created so long ago, has changed you. We're all damned. If you have any sense left in you, you will bring that thing back where you caught it. Go! Now! Just then Oak vanished. I immediately walked over to the teleportation machine and went back to the island, almost as if I had felt that evil nature of this Pokemon actually had brought real-world repercussions. My paranoia got the best of me. I traveled back to the cave and walked inside, but nothing happened. I looked at my party, but nothing was there.
Fuck. I traveled back to Fuchsia City for my answers. My answer was waiting for me in the gym. I walked in and found nothing visible, that is. Battle music started, and I soon found myself face to face with EXP-1. For the second time, I guess, my heart was pounding out of my chest. Now, you might think me foolish for getting so caught up in a video game, but this story is purely to describe the game to you, the reader. And it is a you had to be there story at best. You really would have had to play the game to understand my fear. Otherwise, you'd only find this to be an amusing and maybe interesting off-killer horror read. The horror that I'm speaking of came next. The next thing I remember was waking up in my bed, drenched in sweat. I jumped up and urgently checked my phone for the date. This time, it really was the next day. And just as I sighed with relief, I heard knocking on my door. It was Anne. I brought you some breakfast. How are you feeling? Not so great, but better, I guess, I uttered. I explained everything to her and told her that I thought the game was causing me to black out from time to time. She looked at me in disbelief, but she could tell I was spooked. Jesus, dude. I knew you love video games, but this is plain pathetic. The game is taking its toll on your mental health. Where is it? Despite her harsh words, I knew that she was just concerned. I brought the game out to her, and she swiped it up from my hand without a second thought. I'm taking this for a few days. As for you, do something productive. If I had known you would get so worked up over this thing, I wouldn't have given it to you in the first place. Maybe I'll play it and see what happens. What's got you so stressed out? My last two words to her were, "But Anne." She left. This would be the last time I spoke with Anne. I sat down and thought to myself, maybe this will be good for me. I mean, that game was freaking me out anyway. I don't need it. Those last 4 words may have been true, but it didn't feel that way. Over the course of the next couple of days, I felt a stronger and stronger urge to continue the game and see what would happen next. It was to the point where I just had to get it back. And no one, not even Anne, could keep that game from me. I called and called, texted and texted, but Anne would not answer me. I finally decided to drive to her house to get the game back. If I failed to depict the following events in a cohesive manner, that's to be expected, as this was one of the worst days of my life. I arrived at her house and knocked on the door. For a solid 15 minutes, I tried opening the door, but it was locked. Her car is in the driveway, so she has to be home, I exclaimed aloud. Now, I'm not a fan of breaking and entering, but I was now worried about my best friend. I used my debit card to slip in through the front door. In retrospect, I should have just called the police. I walked upstairs to her room, and after yelling her name a few times, I walked over to her room and opened the door. There she was, lying unconscious on the floor with a Game Boy in her hand and Pokemon Fuchsia in the back. Anne! I ran over to her and shook her almost lifeless body. She wouldn't wake. I looked at the screen on the Game Boy. It was frozen on that same animation, portraying my character with that same menacing smile on his face. I ran downstairs and I called 911 on Anne's house phone. I left my house in such a hurry to get the game back that I forgot to grab my cell phone. An ambulance arrived as well as 2 police cars. Anne was taken away and I was questioned relentlessly about what happened. I never should have told the truth, but I did. So let me get this straight. A video game caused you to black out for 2 weeks and has now put your friend in a coma. The cop interrogating me asked with a grin of distrust on his face. She's in a coma? You have to believe me. I had nothing to do with this. It was the game. Just play it, and you'll see. It was in her Game Boy. I was scared at this point. That's just it, the cop said. There was no Game Boy on the scene. Your story, even if it was remotely believable, is full of holes. Your friend's coma was physically induced by a blow to the head. You admitted to breaking in, and you are the prime suspect in this investigation. I was speechless. I couldn't believe what he was saying. I just couldn't. But wait. My mind wandered. All of a sudden, everything was coming back to me, just like the game. Flashbacks were playing in my head of what really occurred over those weeks. I saw it in a few cutscenes, but I remembered everything. Anne bought me the game. I went home. I played it for 2 weeks, but I was looking at a blank screen the entire time.
The cartridge never worked. She came over after the 2 weeks and yelled at me. "You have to stop playing that game. It doesn't even work. I'm worried about you." I fought with her until she left, and I kept looking at the nothing that was on the screen. She came over the following day and pried the game from my hands as I yelled at her. She left in a hurry and didn't come back. I drove to her home 2 days later and broke in. We fought again. This time Anne was looking frightened. She told me that she gave the game away. I became furious and I pushed her. She fell to the floor and didn't get up. By now, I should maybe mention that as a child I suffered from blackouts, delusions of grandeur. I hadn't had an episode in over 15 years. This had been another one, a more severe one. My mom always thought that I had such an imagination the way that I would play pretend with my Game Boy, until she became worried. I guess that I would play a game through until the end, and then keep playing without the cartridge in. I would create a new and wild storyline so that I could keep playing even when the game was over, especially with my Pokemon games. I used to black out, play games that weren't there, and remember later when my psychiatrist would reach a breakthrough. It wouldn't last, and then I would forget again. Even forget that I had the conversation with my psychiatrist in the first place. Given that my blackouts were mainly harmless, my mom stopped seeking help. I can remember all of this now. I blocked it out for so long. How long will this breakthrough last? How long? The next thing I knew, I woke up in a cold bed in what I later found out was a mental hospital. I must have had another blackout. The doctors here say that Anne passed away shortly after being admitted to the hospital. I don't believe them. Koga has them against me. I'll find out what happened to her. Every answer that I need is in that game. It's my message to the reader. Please help me. If you know where this game is, you have to help me. I have to play it. I need to know what actually happened to Anne. I need to know. It has something to do with the game. I just know it. To anyone who finds this, please bring back the game to me. I have to play it. I have to.
The phenomenon of the Lavender Town tone is a legend that involves a bizarre spate of medical cases and deaths from around the country that have been connected to the Pocket Monsters or Pokemon series of video games. In particular, the first two games of the series, Red and Green. Though the event is largely unheard of due to disclosure laws for companies based in Kyoto Prefecture, there is a large amount of information that has been brought into the open by a number of dedicated individuals, such as Seki Uchitada, Issei Mitsumoto, and Sato Haru, to which this page is dedicated. Thanks also goes out to Ando Kagitada for providing images and animated GIFs for the visual phenomena. This analysis will discuss the other phenomena that is also often confused with the Lavender Town tone, known as White Hand Sprite, Ghost Animation, and Buried Alive model, as well as the semi-related developer tag that was inserted into the games and how to safely perform these Easter eggs in post-First Wave cartridges. The first cases of the Lavender Town tone and associated events were reported a few months after the release of Pocket Monsters Red and Green for the handheld Game Boy video console. These video games were wildly popular with children between the ages of 7 and 12, the core demographic, which was no doubt one of the reasons why the Lavender Town tone had the level of severity that it did. In the game, the players take on a role of a trainer, whose task is to capture, tame, and train wild creatures called Pocket Monsters for battle. These games, and the two newest additions to the series, Pocket Monsters Gold and Silver, an anime, manga, figurine set, collectible card game, and home console games, have resulted in Pocket Monsters becoming a multi-billion-dollar franchise. In one part of the game, the trainer comes to a small, out-of-the-way place called Lavender Town. This town is one of the smallest hamlets in the game aside from the trainer's own hometown, and possesses very few of the services available to the trainer in every other city of the game. Indeed, the location would be unremarkable were it not for Pokemon Tower, a colossal building that holds the graves of hundreds of deceased Pokemon. It is theorized that because of this location in the game, at least 200 children lost their lives, and many more developed sudden illnesses and afflictions. In fact, this doesn't even consider the vast waves of unreported illnesses or deaths whose causes were unnoticed. It was not until the spring of 1996 that causes that would eventually become linked to the Lavender Town tone began to surface. The earliest record of acknowledgement of these effects of the Lavender Town tone that the author could find came from an internal report made in June of 1996 by the company Game Freak Incorporated, which was then leaked by one of its former employees, Misato Haru. In it, the employees gave a list of names, dates, and symptoms, records of children between the ages of 7 and 12 who have suffered various medical problems as a result of playing Pocket Monsters Red and Green. Some of the records are listed below. It should be noted that entries in the appendix also include symptoms born not from the Lavender Town tone, but from the so-called White Hand Sprite, Ghost Animation, and Buried Alive model, all of which were visual phenomena that provoked similar but distinct symptoms. More details on Part 2. April 12th, 1996. Age 11. Obstructive sleep apnea. Severe migraines. May 23rd, 1996. Age 12. General irritability. Insomnia. Addiction to video games. Nosebleeds. Developed into violent streaks against others and eventually himself. Deceased. April 27, 1996. Age 11. Cluster headaches. Irritability. Eventually took mixed painkillers. Deceased. Name. March 4th, 1996. Age 7. Migraines. Sluggish and slow behavior. Unresponsiveness. Developed into deafness and went missing. Body later discovered beside the road, April 20th, 1996. Deceased. The document that was circulated internally was the first time these incidents had been connected with the Pocket Monsters video games. Until then, the cause had not been discovered or diagnosed by medical professionals. Indeed, it's uncertain how the company themselves managed to find the cases related to the events without seeking advice from medical services. The predominant symptoms related to what became later known as the Lavender Town tone includes headaches and migraines, bleeding from the eyes and ears, mood swings and irritability, addiction to games, unprovoked violence, withdrawal and unresponsiveness, and in about 67% of cases, suicidal tendencies. However, these symptoms only manifest in children between the ages of 7 and 12 who have reached the area in the game known as Lavender Town. Most of them were revealed to have been wearing headphones or earphones while playing the game at the time. As it turns out, the developers of the Lavender Town area had sought to make an area that would leave an impression on the player, according to Seki Uchitada, a member of the development team. Seki claimed that at the time of development, a number of the team were interested in making Lavender Town a little different from the rest of the game. The Pokemon Tower is a visible result of that, Seki told Game Dimensions magazine in an interview earlier this year. That and the fact that Lavender Town is so different from all other cities in the game. It's smaller, has fewer people occupying it, no gym, and, of course, the music is very, very eerie. In fact, in the first version of the game, we were told to slightly change the song played in the background of Lavender Town because our manager told us that it would make children upset. The music used in subsequent versions is different. Either Seki is unaware of the full impact of Lavender Town,
or was vastly under-exaggerating how upset children would get. No more is said of the music in the article, but there are mentions of Lavender Town's other macabre features. What Seki failed to disclose to Game Dimensions magazine was that the music used in the first wave release of Pocket Monsters Red and Green was formulated out of an experiment in binaural beats, using slightly different frequencies of sound. Each frequency played in one ear through the headphones or earphones, and various psychological effects can be induced upon the listener. In most versions of the first wave releases, this results in the player feeling uneasy, apprehensive, and mildly disturbed. However, for upwards of 200 children, it provoked a variety of disturbances in the brain that went undetected purely because it was undetectable by fully developed human ears. Instead, only children fell victim to the tones, resulting in psychological and physiological problems that in some cases lead to death, many of which were suicides.
The visual effects are known among programming circles as the white hand sprite, the ghost animation, and the buried alive model. Each has been found to cause headaches, nausea, and in severe cases, hemorrhaging of the brain and lungs. While around 70% of Lavender Town syndrome, or LTS, is due to the Lavender Town tone, the remaining percentage is split among the visual phenomena. This is partly due to the visual stimuli occurring after the player is introduced to the Lavender Town tone. It's been theorized that these unaffected by the aural stimulation, such as the deaf or hard of hearing, make up the remaining 30%. While viewing these models can cause the effects, there are certain methods that allow a viewer to safely examine them in detail. The White Hand Sprite, known in the code as whitehand.gif. This was scripted to appear as a Pokemon on the third floor of the Lavender Town Tower. It is divided into 4 separate animations: an introduction, or the cry a Pokemon unleashes before a battle, an idle, and 2 attacks. These attacks are unknown as they're simply listed as fist and brutal. While viewing the animation has been proven to be hazardous, viewing the individual frames of the model has been proven to have no adverse effects. The white hand is depicted as a shriveled, slightly decayed hand, with surprising attention to detail. Flesh is peeling back from the bone, and several tendons dangle realistically out of the wrist. The first attack is the hand balling into a fist and swinging forward. However, the brutal animation is missing several frames. The hand seems to open up, then cuts out. After a few seconds, it reappears closed again. No record has been found of these missing frames. The ghost animation, known in the code as haunting.swf, was intended to be placed in several areas throughout the tower, including the center of a path on the second floor. However, players cannot interact with it, leaving many to believe that it was intended as a background feature. The ghost animation, like the white hand sprite, must be viewed as individual frames. It's comprised of 59 frames total. However, after extraction, around half of these frames have been revealed to be the standard ghost model used in all versions of the Pocket Monsters games that allow travel to Lavender Town. Around a quarter of the remaining frames are comprised of static that produces a fading effect. However, interspersed with these bursts of static are several frames of screaming faces and images of a skeletal man in a cloak, hypothesized to be the Grim Reaper.
and several killed corpses. The meaning behind these are unknown. While under oath before the Video Game Commission Board, lead programmer Hisashi Sogabe testified as to having no knowledge as to where these images surfaced. Out of all the phenomena associated with LTS, the animation is the most speculated on. In his thesis, Video Games and the Manipulation of the Human Mind, Dr. Jackson Turner argued that the images were intentionally placed in. Due to their brief time appearing on the screen and the graphic nature of these images, Turner theorized that these were meant to subliminally influence players into becoming more frightened by the disturbing surroundings. The Buried Alive model, often referred to as its code name, the Berryman script. The Buried Alive model was to be found on the final story of the Pokemon Tower, on the spot of what has been replaced with the Marowak ghost. According to the script assigned to it, the Buried Alive model was intended to be the boss of the tower. Upon reaching the top floor, the following conversation would have taken place.
You're here. I'm trapped. And I'm lonely. So very lonely. Won't you join me?
After this, the battle would have initiated. Once in battle view, the Buried Alive model appears to be a decaying human corpse, attempting to crawl out of the ground. It has been programmed to have 2 white hands, a Gengar, and a Muck. Strangely enough, a protocol for Buried Alive's actions after defeat weren't written. In the case of the player defeating him, the game would freeze. However, an unknown programmer is said to have wrote a specific ending that was supposed to play once the Buried Alive model had won. In this ending, Buried Alive was to have stated, "Finally, fresh meat," followed by several lines of gibberish. He was to have then dragged the player into the ground surrounding him. The scene would finish with a typical game over screen. However, in the background, an image of Buried Alive devouring the player was to have been seen. Especially strange are the protocols for after this scene. The cartridge was to download this image to the small internal memory contained in the Game Boy, overriding the title screen that normally accompanied a Game Boy turning on. Afterward, whenever the Game Boy was started, the player would view this same image of Buried Alive devouring the player character from the Pokemon games as a sound file known as staticmesh.wave was played. The intended purpose for this effect, unlike many of the other factors leading towards LTS, is unknown.
A few years ago, I was really into Pokemon games. I still am. I had raised a decent enough time on my Pokemon Diamond game, but was quickly becoming bored of it. I was stoked to hear about a local club of eager fans such as myself to battle it out to see who was the very best, and naturally, I persisted on asking my mother and father to go, and they said yes. The place itself was just at a small primary school in one of the classes. I looked around, and there was only about 3 other people, excluding myself,
One of the people, a girl, stood out from all the rest. Me being me, I approached her and said hello. The girl, for identity purposes, we'll call her Jane, had a white Nintendo DS clutched in her hands, the same color as mine. "Battle?" she asked, and I accepted. And she beat me, 5-1. We continued to sit in the corner and battle until her older brother came to pick her up. "Will I see you next week?" I asked. She nodded with a small smile. The next week came, and I saw Jane. However, her short brown hair was now shaved off, and she was completely bald. She looked awfully sick. Trying not to be rude, I ignored it and approached her. Her dull face turned into a smile when she saw mine, and we battled. Her older brother came to pick her up again, and I said my goodbyes. That evening, I heard my mom and dad yelling, and my dad came into my room in a fit of rage, slamming the door, taking a deep breath. "Ian, your mother and I don't love each other anymore. Your mother's moving back home, and I want you to go with her, so at least she can have some company. You understand, right?" he asked. And I nodded. We left the following Saturday morning. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to Jane. We started our new life there. I forgot entirely about Jane, and a few years later, I moved back to Australia with my fiancé. We moved into a nice house near my old one, and even started our own family. It wasn't until I went to the attic to grab a box that I found my old Pokemon Diamond game, safely tucked into the blue pouch I always kept it in. Memories of the previous years came rushing back, and I remembered everything. The classroom, Jane, our battles, her address, everything. And I rushed out of the house, game clenched in my hand, and I found her house, knocked on the door, and to my relief, Jane's older brother answered. "Ian? Is that you?" he asked. Yeah, it's me," I said. "Jane, is Jane okay?" And he swallowed and sighed. "Jane, passed away several months after you stopped going to the club, Ian," he said. I felt tears in my eyes as I looked down. "I'm sorry," I said. "She left something for you, though. It was really persistent that you and only you received it. Wouldn't be... Well, just give me a minute," he said, entering the house and then coming back out, handing me a small package. "Here, take it." I took it and opened it. And inside was a black Nintendo DS with the game Pokemon Pearl inside. It was Jane's. And there was a note attached. "Dear Ian, I know this will never get to you, but so... just want to say that whenever you come back to the club, my world felt like maybe... just maybe I have something to live for. I love you, Ian. Always will. Love, Jane." I clenched the package tight, tears rolling down my face. I thanked him and returned home, but when I did, my fiancé asked what was up, and I told her. I told her everything that I remembered. She sighed and hugged me, wiped the tears from my eyes, cuddled with me on the couch. I know now why Jane was bald that day. She was diagnosed with cancer. I laid myself against her chest and I fell asleep. A single tear trickling from my eye. Ever since I was a child, I loved Pokemon. I loved how it was such a social game and so fun. The characters, the creatures, the world, it all drew me in. So imagine my surprise when they announced that you could soon be able to play in real life. Walk around the world in real time, see your favorite Pokemon in real world locations, meet people playing the same game. It sounded like a dream come true. When it became available, I started to download it. I was shaking, thinking about all the fun that I would have, the people I'd meet. And little did I know I should have been shaking from an entirely different reason. Last night I was in my room, messing around on my phone. I went on Pokemon Go to claim my reward for the Pokestop located just close enough to my room that I could access it from my bed. And after I got some much desired Pokeballs, I decided to check out my nearby tab to see if anything rare was in my area. Much to my surprise, I saw this. It's weird, I thought. It obviously doesn't look like any Pokemon in the series. I wrote it off as either a graphical glitch. It's not like Pokemon Go is free of its glitches, or some rare Easter egg in reference to a mysterious Pokemon named Unknown. I screenshotted it and sent it to my friend Julie, asking if she'd heard anything similar. Julie, who was too into astrology and Pokemon for her own good, told me that the symbol was for the hangman. And I told her that she was out of her head. She insisted, though, telling me it meant letting go and sacrifice. I definitely thought that was weird. What was some tarot symbol doing in a Pokemon game? I figured she was mistaken, told her good night, decided to try and fall asleep. I lied down, closed my eyes, and started to drift away. And this was until I started to regret becoming friends with Julie. Angrily, I opened my phone to see what she was texting me about. You have to check it out. Go pursue it. You may have some kind of cool discovery. What if you're the first person to find something completely new? My psychic says something exciting was in the future for someone I'm close to. It never ended. Julie was always a little much. I muted the conversation and tried to go back to bed. Tried being a keyword. My mind was racing with the possibilities of what it could be. Annoying as she was, what if she was right? This could be the next Pokemon mystery. Slightly hating myself for doing so, I opened Pokemon Go. I clicked the nearby tab to see if it was still there. It was, but now it was only 2 footsteps away, meaning it was closer than the last time I checked. I thought. Weird. In my experience, Pokemon never come closer to you. You have to go closer to them. Admittedly spooked, I closed the app, told myself that I was crazy, and closed my eyes again. What's all this about? The symbol for sacrifice appeared in my game, and it started coming towards me. Since at this point I was too intrigued to fall asleep, I looked up the Hangman. It's described as the most mysterious card in the tarot deck. It suggests sacrifice, or surrender, is the best option. I thought that this was interesting. If surrender is the best option, should I give up on this? I wanted to, but it was just too fascinating. The symbol completely goes against the theme of Pokemon. There's no way the developers purposely would have included it. I was lost in thought. And when I heard a loud gasp from my parents' room. Gross. That's probably my parents having sex in there. God knows I've walked in on them doing it before. Cringing at that thought, wanting to solve this mystery and dying to get as far away from my fornicating parents as possible. I opened Pokemon Go so I could go out and find the Hangman. I opened the nearby tab and let out a little gasp myself. It's now only a footstep away. It's now very close to me, I thought to myself. How unusual. This thing went from being very far away to very close, completely on its own. I got terrified. That's just not how the game works. I got a terrible feeling, sick to my stomach. I had to get out of my house. I slipped out of my door, passing my parents' room. I could see from the shadows under the door that there was a lot of movement, and I could faintly hear heavy breathing. It was disgusting. I felt even worse and got out of my house. I wanted to find this thing, but at the same time, I wanted to go away. How could this be happening? It was just approaching me. One footstep at a time, getting closer and closer to me. I walked in a beeline straight away from my house. If this thing was coming towards my house, I wanted away. So I walked to the nearest Pokestop and rested there. I checked my phone, dying to see if the hangman was still close to me. My thumb glided towards the nearby button. I wanted so badly to know. I realized how silly I probably was. It's Pokemon, for God's sake, and yet I truly felt like I was dealing with something terrible. I hesitated, holding my breath, closed my eyes in fear and pressed the button. I opened them to disbelief. It was completely gone. Nothing nearby but a Venonat and a Jigglypuff. I sighed with relief and felt like a royal idiot. It's Pokemon. There's not some astrology-based entity haunting me. It's just a graphical glitch. Nothing more. Nothing less. Just in my head nonsense. Laughing at how afraid I was a second ago, I decided to go back home. Some silly hangman being the last thing in my mind. And once I got home, I drifted past my parents' room as fast as possible, only to realize it was completely silent and completely still. I put my ear to the door to confirm that they were done being perverts, and much to my satisfaction, they were. I said, "I'm going to bed, good night." To no response. It's weird. They're not asleep since the lights were still on, and they always say good night to me. I knocked on the door. No response. The thought of the hangman came into my mind, and I suddenly felt very heavy. Did something happen to them? What the hell's going on? I began to open the door, feeling my heart beat out of my chest. The high squeaking of the door made me cringe. The gust of cold air from inside the room made me shiver. But the sight I saw when the door was completely open made my heart drop to the ground. The tears welled up in my eyes. My vision began to narrow. My head hurt. Across from me was the bodies of my parents lying in a pool of their own blood. I fell to the ground. Their throats were completely slit open, blood all over the floor and wall. My mind was blank. There was no way this was real, I thought. I was completely in shock. I just knelt there, staring at my dead parents, mouth agape. My body was shutting down. It was only when I looked up that I noticed. Drawn crudely on the wall above the warm bodies of my parents was the symbol. It all came rushing back to me. I was right. Julie was right. It wasn't some graphical glitch. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. It cut open my parents' necks. I felt furious. I pulled out my phone. I had to call the cops. Whatever killed my parents couldn't be far. I unlocked my phone and it opened to my most recent app, Pokemon Go. But what I saw next to me made me drop my phone into the pool of my parents' blood. The symbol of the hangman, it was right behind me. I clicked it just as you would any Pokemon within the vicinity. I held it up to the wall, seeing if it would reveal something. Nothing. I slowly turned around, dying to see what would be there, yet dying to stash away my phone and forget anything happened. I turned slow as a snail, terrified of what it would reveal. I quickly snapped it towards the door, where the map said that it would be. The opening revealed the grim darkness of the hallway. But there was no hangman at all. I lowered my phone, shaking in fear of whatever might be standing in the darkness, when two dirty, long-nailed hands grabbed me from the ceiling. It pulled on my head, lifting me off the ground by my hair. I screamed in pain, swinging back and forth, kicking and thrashing wildly. I was flying helpless, and I caught myself in a spider's web. In that moment, I was the hangman. I dug my nails into the thing's papery skin, piercing its flesh like it had done to my parents a few moments earlier. It let out an inhuman cry and dropped me. My hands were covered in its cold and sticky blood. I peered up at the ceiling, seeing where it hung. It gazed down at me with large black eyes, long black hair dangling down, feet bound together and tied to the ceiling. It made a grin, revealing its sharp row of teeth. I stared up at it like a child, standing before an abusive father. I felt smaller than I'd ever felt before. Wielding its long, sharp nails, it cut the rope, binding it to the ceiling, and on all fours crawled out the door at an inhuman speed, leaving behind a trail of its dark blood. I opened Pokemon Go and checked the nearby tab.
1 footprint away. 2 footprints away. 3. Then, like a drop of water in the ocean, it was gone. I just called the cops. I'm recording this from my room as I can't bear to look at my parents' bodies. I'm waiting for their arrival, nervously checking the nearby tab on my phone frequently. I think it's gone for good. So for the love of all that's holy, delete Pokemon Go. Don't hesitate. Don't mistake my message. I know I should never have downloaded it, so learn from me and stay safe, or else you'll find yourself the next victim of the hangman.
I am the original. I am the best. I care not what those journals say. They are wrong. 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 I am the original. Aren't I?
I figured the Pokeballs attached around my waist. My Pokemon. My partners, my faithful companions, my best friends. Through thick and thin, we'd gone through the perils of Johto and Kanto. And now here I was, standing at the entrance to the old mansion. I had been mesmerized by the beauty of a Ninetales that I had battled against on my way here. I wanted one. I had to have one, and the kid trainer told me that Vulpix could be found in the old Cinnabar mansion, which was just about destroyed. Dangerous. But I was getting that Vulpix, whether this stupid mansion wanted me to or not. I double-checked my party, making sure that everyone was set and ready to go. My Feraligatr, Beedrill, Noctowl, Umbreon, and Rapidash all seemed ready. There was the question of whether or not he was ready. I bit my lip. Having been told by a friend of the journals that were scattered around the mansion that he had pointed out the connection to my dearest boy, and I, of course, denied every single thing that he pointed out. I had to. My Pokemon were practically my children, and what parent would not try to protect their child? Even I couldn't ignore everything. I decided to just keep him in his Pokeball for the trip, even if his psychic powers were good against the poison Pokemon that practically ruled this place. I took the ball, shoved it down deep into my backpack. I made sure I had plenty of potions, antidotes, and burn heals, and after finding satisfaction in my stores, I slung the bag across my back and called out my Rapidash. I kindly asked her if she would lighten up the dark mansion for me, and the Pokemon whinnied and flared brighter. And I smiled and thanked her. Guess that was a yes. Oh, I'm so tired. Where are we? I can't tell. It's dark and stuffy. It's hot, too. Too hot. I don't like it. Why can't I see? This feeling. Why do I have it? Why do I suddenly feel so ice cold? Where are we? I felt the Pokeball rattle in my backpack. Considering my bag was so loaded with stuff, I was surprised I could feel it. My boy must be distressed. I frowned. I knew he didn't like being in dark places, and yet I still did this to him. He'll be upset, but
Not as much as he would be if he was out. The lesser of two evils, I supposed. And I simply couldn't have him in the storage system. He'd live. I slid my Pokédex out of my pocket, looking at the picture of the Vulpix on the screen, studying it. I scanned over its info. I'd be ready to face this thing once I found it. I even had the brand new Ultra Ball in my pocket, ready to toss at the fox.
Oh! Vulpix?
My gaze snapped up from the screen and my eyes widened. My prize had come to me, it seemed. Who was I to complain about it? The Vulpix spotted me, with pinprick eyes. It took off down the decrepit hallway, grinning. I readied for Alligator's Pokeball and took off after it, my feet pounding on the molded carpet. I feel sick. I have a headache. Is there anything for that? Maybe something for humans. Maybe it'd work for me too. I'm not too different from them after all, no matter how much it pains me to say so. Some of them in the world. We're moving. That sick feeling got stronger. The air smells familiar. Are we in a cave? No, it's not a cave. It feels too strange to be a cave. Let's see. There's mold in the air. The air smells stale. We're enclosed somewhere. It's too dry to be a cave. The air isn't dusty. There's ash. Something's burning. Was recently burning. That explains the heat, I guess. There's something behind all that. It's so familiar. It practically drilled into my mind. And into my fear, it seems. Where are we? Am I in the bag? Is there something I shouldn't see? Why not? I'm strong enough to handle it. I'm strong enough to handle anything! I chased the Vulpix through the dark. All of a sudden, it took a sharp turn to the right, into a room. Rapidash and I rushed into the room, my partner's bright flames penetrating the shadows that lurked in every corner. It was almost eerie, now that I think about it. I turned to the far side of the room. The Vulpix was trapped against the wall, hissing and spitting. I frowned. Water would just scare it more, I knew, so with a quick ember from my powerful Rapidash and a flick of my wrist, Vulpix was safely inside the Ultra Ball. I walked over and lifted the Pokeball, tucking into a pocket on my bag. I'd stick it in the PC once I got back outside. I slung my backpack off, reaching down one side of the pockets to grab an escape rope. When I saw it. The journal my friend had told me about. Why was it lying on the ground as if someone had pitched the old book against the wall, though I'd never know. What was in that book, though? I had to know, and my curiosity suddenly lurked in the front of my mind like a shadow on a sunny day. It was there. There was no getting rid of it, even though I practically promised myself and my body that I wouldn't. I reached forward and pulled the book toward myself, being extremely careful with the yellowed pages. I bit my lip, gently turning to the front of the book. July 5th, Guyana, South America. We discovered a new species of Pokemon. It seems that all members of this species are now gone, sadly. This makes studying the new Pokemon very hard. Luckily, we had recovered samples of the Pokemon's DNA. They appear to be very recent. Have these Pokemon only recently gone extinct, or are they actually still alive? Why does this sound so familiar? It's so painfully familiar. I can feel it in the back of my mind. Why can't I remember? I turned the page, surprised to find a few pages torn out. I turned to where the book was lying, finding scattered piles of tiny bits of torn paper, and I frowned. There's no salvaging that. I sighed and continued to read. July 10th. Due to its supposed kitten-like appearance, We have decided to christen the new Pokémon Mew. I smiled. Mew was a cute name. Mew. 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 The name is so easy to say, it rolls off my tongue as easily as my own name. I can feel it burning in my mind. I know that name. Why do I know that name? I turned the next few pages, finding them torn out or simply destroyed to the point that only a few lines of text were readable. Finally, I came to something useful. February 6th, Cinnabar, Kanto. The tests on the Mew have proved successful. We have cloned a brand new specimen. However, the limited DNA we have had to work with will not work. Professor Blaine offered some of his own blood for the research. While the clone is not what we had hoped for, being very little, like the original Mew, it will have to suffice. We have decided to call this creature Mewtwo. Mewtwo appears to be rather powerful. We don't, however, yet know the extent of his power. I frowned and bit my lip. My friend had lied to me. He hadn't wanted me to read these. He had pointed out small similarities that were painfully real. My Mewtwo was really a science experiment? No. I remember now. I remember it all now. I don't remember this. I refuse to believe that I'm just a science experiment. I had emotions. I had thought. I had to suffice. I believed them. I believed those stupid humans. I believed they cared. I'm as stupid as them for believing their charade. They care nothing about life. I just had to suffice, though. I was almost shaking. My poor Mewtwo. This was really what he was intended for? My bottom lip quivered. I choked back tears. My Mewtwo. What would have happened if he hadn't escaped? What fate would he have come to if he hadn't been with me now? I read on. I had to know what the end would have been if he didn't. September 1st, Cinnabar, Kanto. Mewtwo is far too powerful. All attempts to weaken its vicious tendencies have failed. I flipped through the remaining pages, finding only blank paper. I threw the book against the wall and slung my backpack over my shoulder. I jumped on Rapidash's back, trusting her to take me to the entrance. I just had to get out. I remember now. Oh, so vividly. But no matter how many times I run it in my head, it just seems like a story. I am Mewtwo. I am myself. I am no one's clone. I realize I'm pushing into my dear trainer's thoughts, but I don't care. It's better if someone knows what I'm thinking. I have to get it out. I am the original. I am the best. I care not for what that journal says. They're wrong. Wrong. I'm the original. Aren't I? No matter how many times I say it, I can't convince myself it's true. Misfortune is an unrecognized game for the original Game Boy. To those who know of it and have played it, it's considered one of the scariest video games ever made. The game revolves around what appears to be a little boy who meets a malevolent being in a strange, gothic building. The beginning never gives its name, but it is heavily implied that this is the devil. Upon meeting the creature, a dialogue box appears with text, "I exist within the very fabric of reality. Do you want to challenge me?" This is followed by a yes or no choice. Should the player choose yes, the being replies, "Then let it begin." The player is then transported to a series of maze-like rooms, each filled with a pit drop, locked doors, keys, and traps. The object for the player is to survive each room by either reaching the stairs to the next level or solving another kind of puzzle. This can be a riddle or something else, such as picking the correct door. A good example of the level is where 4 small cabins are shown on screen, and the dialogue box appears that reads, "Choose wrong and misfortune will befall your loved ones. Are you ready to play?" Should the player make a mistake or choose a wrong exit, the screen will cut to black for a second before showing a screen of a higher resolution of the demon with a dialogue box underneath that reads, "I am God here," with blood-styled writing, possibly being the inspiration of creepypastas such as the well-known Sonic.exe. Some people who played this game and lost suddenly began to suffer from depression, and there were several cases in which people committed suicide after losing the game. Other people became jittery in their everyday life, and some became physically sick. However, if they were able to complete the challenges, they seemed to continue their everyday life with no change. Also, if a player was to make a mistake in-game, that would lead to game over, but the player quickly turned the Game Boy off, they would suffer no repercussions. It appeared to be that viewing the game over screen was responsible. This led the few people who know of the game to wonder exactly why losing the game would cause such drastic effects. The answer was the music. The music in this game was generally mature, and although being limited to the 8-bit Game Boy sound, the music was very dark and disturbing at best. However, the I Am God game over screen had especially disturbing, disharmonic music that accompanied it, and it is believed that this was the cause of the misfortune to the player. It consisted of deep buzzy sounds and off-key melody, and the general sound of the music was damaging to the brainwave patterns. Many people who have heard about this game but never actually played it have asked about how they can get their hands on a copy and why it's never been heard of, at least for the most part. It seemed that searching for the game online has come up short, and all that exists are recordings of the game music and a few screenshots. Not even a copy of the ROM seemed to be available via various ROM sites. Well, if you're wondering where you can get a copy, if you're a hardcore Game Boy cartridge or even a ROM collector, chances are you already have it. If you've gone through your collection of classic Game Boy cartridges and are certain it isn't there, I advise looking again. Not at the cartridges, but inside them. Misfortune was never released on its own cartridge, and some people noticed that many sprites and textures in Misfortune were rehashed from other games of a similar gameplay style. A few people who played on the Game Boy ROMs noticed something about certain games that didn't make sense. In some games, mainly games like Zelda or Pokemon, people discovered that glitches and sometimes a certain sequence of events and choices warped them to misfortune. Unfortunately, there's very little information on this on the internet, possibly due to the small minority of people who have actually known of this game, probably due to how hard it is to find. However, do not be disheartened by that. There may not be much of the game, but there is something if you dig deep enough. Don't expect to find information on the top of your searches. One thing that does seem certain, however, is that it appears to be within the ROMs as well as the cartridges. It is uncertain how many Game Boy games actually contain Misfortune, but some of the known games are listed below: The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, Pokemon Red, Spud's Adventure, Poochie Carrot. The only question this leaves is why Misfortune is hidden. And not only hidden, but in so many different games which seem to have no connection with each other. A few rumors have been floating around that due to the game's disturbing nature and its curse, to harm people who lose at it. It was never allowed to be released, and perhaps Nintendo hid it inside of other titles for that same reason. But this seems extremely unlikely due to Nintendo's very strict rule on what's acceptable and what isn't. And it's impossible that they would allow a game like this to be incorporated in their popular titles in secret. Even though it was never made clear how to access this game or why it is there, it is still considered the scariest game ever made by the few people in the world that have discovered it.
Pokemon Go is a fun game when you don't live in an area devastated by industrial contamination and toxic waste. Pokemon Go is a fun game when the Pokestops aren't at local landmarks steeped in mercury and lead. Pokemon Go is a fun game when innocent gamers don't congregate in areas where the grass no longer grows because of carbon tetrachloride and dioxin and radionuclides in the soil. For the kids in the city and even the adults in the city, Pokemon Go should be the kind of game to help them through the hell of their day-to-day lives. It should be a distraction from the omnipresent horror of living in a place that's no longer on anyone's map, a place that the outside world thinks is better off forgotten, if only playing it wasn't killing them. At the community hospital where I work, we've had a substantial increase in the number of patients displaying some effects of being poisoned, skin deterioration, pregnancy complications, respiratory disease, etc., all consistent with the various environmental pollutants in different parts of town. Nearly all of those admitted have been Pokemon Go players. Our city council had a meeting with officials from the police and fire departments, hoping to figure out a way to keep those dangerous locations off limits to visitors. Lots of ideas were floated, but they all got shot down. The city has no money to erect barriers or police the areas. There were simply far too many of them. Signs started to go up. That was the only thing everyone in the council could agree on. The signs explicitly mentioned Pokemon Go and featured the frightening biohazard and radiation warning symbols. No one was deterred. The poisonings continued. I'd never played Pokemon in my life. I didn't know anything about it. As more and more people started to show up at the hospitals, though, I got the impression that I should get at least a basic grasp on what everyone was obsessed with. So when I got home, I downloaded the app. Right away, 3 of them showed up in my living room. I tapped the turtle-looking one and threw a ball at it. It was mine. Pretty cool, actually. Simple mechanics. There was a radar thing on the bottom right and 3 paw prints under silhouettes of other Pokemon I hadn't seen yet. I didn't have any idea where the things were in relation to me, and it seemed stupid that the radar was so worthless. But as I walked around, I'd eventually run into one. Not one on the radar, mind you, but still one I hadn't seen before. I started to understand why people enjoyed the game so much. I found myself wishing the residential areas had more Pokemon to catch. When I zoomed my map all the way out, in the distance, I could see those spinning blue towers, many of which were shooting out pink confetti. From what I'd read online, that's where all the good Pokemon were. It's also where all the industrial contamination was. Now, when I got to work the next day, I was shocked to find one of those blue towers in the hospital. When I clicked it, the little blurb said that it was in the children's wing. Now, I never go on that side of the hospital, but I figured, what the hell, and walked over. Once I was in range, I spun the wheel, and all this stuff popped out, balls, potions, and even, like, this egg. It said 10 kilometers on it. I threw the thing in my incubator, knowing it'd probably hatch at some point on my shift. I did tons of walking. Halfway through my day of walking up and down the labyrinth halls, I checked my phone. Less than 0.4 kilometers. God damn it. A familiar alarm sounded, and I rushed to the ER. Before I saw what had happened, I could smell it. A group of teenagers had jumped the fence of the old battery factory, apparently. There were 3 Pokestops inside, 2 of which were overlapping. The third, though, is inaccessible unless you go through the basement. The spot is a memorial for the company founder and is located in the viewing area above a group of vats. As the factory deteriorated, a catwalk leading to the memorial had fallen. To reach the Pokestop, the kids had traversed the profoundly toxic basement. They reached the Pokestop without incident, but one of them saw something called a Lapras on his radar. One kid, David, headed in one direction, while his friends went in the other. Whoever found the Lapras was going to yell, and his friends could come catch it for themselves. It was David that found the Lapras, but it was also David who, in his process of yelling and gesturing to his friends, slipped. When David slipped, he crashed into an unlabeled, rusty container. His friends saw the whole thing. The container, filled with contents that had corroded it over the years, burst. From the waist down, David was covered completely with a vicious, caustic combination of concentrated acid and various unknown industrial toxins. The friends received several burns on their hands and arms when they hauled David out of the basement into the car. After they pulled the car up to the ER doors, a very kind but very dumb Samaritan who had been nearby rushed to help. He had made the mistake of grabbing David by his foot and ankle. He degloved David's leg all the way up to his crotch. The slewed skin splashed onto the pavement as the Samaritan screamed with horror, and then pain as steam began to rise from his own hands. Long, terrible story short, surgeons had to amputate everything below David's ribcage. The rest of his skin was damaged beyond repair, leaving him covered with an otherworldly patchwork of hard gray burns. His friends, as well as the dumb Samaritan, lost their hands. 2 of the ER rooms needed to be closed for 48 hours so they could decontaminate it. Of all the Pokemon Go accidents we'd had in that short time following its release, it was the worst. One might think the accident would deter other people from going into the industrial zones. Quite the contrary. Once people learned that they could catch a Lapras near the factory, despite warnings and promises to arrest trespassers, trainers swarmed. They knew no one would be there to arrest them. Cops had better things to do. 2 days later, we had a handful of patients with burned lungs, a few with debilitating fatigue, and 2 pregnancy complications, both of which ended in miscarriages. The remains of the fetuses were indescribably deformed. How such deformities could occur in such a short period of time was beyond anyone's guess. I needed to take my mind off everything that I'd seen, so what did I do? Played Pokemon Go. I used the Pokestop at the hospital frequently. Whenever I had a spare moment, I'd go into the parking lot, catch Pidgeys and Raditors. I yearned for the bigger, better Pokemon that I knew could be obtained from the old factories. I even drove up to the fence outside one and saw something huge on my radar, but I was too afraid for my own safety to get out and investigate. In the brief period I was sitting in my car out front, I watched 6 people hop the fence, run into the factory. I admit I felt a little jealous. I forced myself to get over it. Last night started like all other nights since the game had been released, but turned into a tragedy felt hospital-wide. Lenisha David, who had undergone successful fertility treatments a few months prior, was expecting sextuplets, a first for our hospital. She was in excellent health, and only a month away from her due date. She'd never played a second of Pokemon in her life, but her husband and son had. Lenisha never knew they'd frequented an abandoned factory that once made herbicides. Over the few days they'd gone and come back, Lenisha was walking barefoot on the toxins they tracked into the house. The pain and bleeding that caused her to come to the hospital ended the same way that it had for the other pregnant women exposed to the toxins. The deformities of her miscarried sextuplets were hideous. Their complexions were albino and their limbs were gone. All that remained were round, hard blobs containing lidless, glaring eyes and fully toothed, gaping mouths. Lenisha had to be sedated. She wouldn't stop screaming. The image of the sextuplets stuck with me. I was scheduled for an overnight shift. There was a free bunk where I could have slept, but that was out of the question. I wandered the halls aimlessly, waiting for Pokemon and gathering supplies whenever I passed the Pokestop. Around 3 this morning, I saw a shape on my radar. It was a big one, and I think it was nearby. 2 other smaller ones were also showing up. I speed walked in all directions until I finally saw them appear on my map. I felt pretty lucky to have them all come at once. 7 balls later, I captured all 3. A Horsey, a Kakuna, and a big one was an Execute. I looked around. I walked without paying attention to my location in the hospital, and when I realized where I'd gone, I shuddered. It was where abnormal specimens were dissected and tested. Dr. Ahad was working on one of those deformed miscarriages from the day before. To his side, about to go into the refrigeration unit, was a large biohazard bag containing Lenisha's sextuplets. Sorrow
suffused through me as the scenario played out again in my head. As I stared, a feeling I can't explain pricked the hair on the back of my neck. My phone vibrated in my pocket. There was a Pokemon nearby. I checked the radar. It was the silhouette of a big round thing with 2 arms. I remembered seeing that one online when I was learning about the game. The Geodude. I did my best to shake off my misery as I trawled the halls until the Geodude showed up. I caught it, had a moment of excitement from adding another entry to my Pokedex, then returned to my weariness and sorrow. I checked where I was. I was right in front of David's room. He was on a ventilator. He was covered in bandages. Fluid kept seeping through his gray, cracked skin. A nurse was getting ready to change his gauze. I felt such sympathy for the kid. My eyes blurred with tears. When my eyes welled up, I stared at the shape of David on the bed. Gray with a round, hipless torso and 2 long arms. My breath caught in my throat. Before I knew it, I was running back to where Dr. Ahad had been working. The room was dark. He'd gone home for the night. I scanned my key card and let myself in. I opened the refrigerator unit and removed the 2 bags of the miscarriages from the days before. One was shaped like a seahorse. Another looked like a cocoon. I thought back to the 3 that I'd caught right outside the room. My hands shook as I opened the larger, cold box housing the remains of Lanisha's sextuplets. The inside of the bag was coated with a grayish-red slime, and I couldn't see the contents. I put on gloves and made the sign of the cross as tears ran down my face. I took out each horrifically deformed fetus and arranged them on sample trays. My weeping turned to racking sobs as I examined their features. Pink, limbless, wide-eyed, egg-shaped. 6 in a row.
You see, I'm a simple college student living alone in an apartment. I was very enthusiastic about the release of Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver here in the States. I purposely locked myself out of all media and the internet aside from school purposes. That means no 4chan, no V, no Bulbapedia, etc. As I was busy with the school year and being poor at the time, I wasn't able to buy Soul Silver on launch date. After my school year ended, I ordered Soul Silver on Amazon. However, it would take a week for it to arrive. I decided that during that time, I'd replay my Crystal version on my Game Boy Color. However, I realized that long ago, my mom threw it away because I told her the save went dead, and I was very upset about it then. She also threw away my Silver version, so all I have is my Game Boy Color. As such, I set out to GameStop and bought a used Silver version, as it's the only Pokemon game left that they have for GBC. $10, fairly cheap despite it being GameStop. I went home and started it up for a nostalgia trip. However, that's where things started getting bizarre. And most likely the reason why you're hearing this. The Game Freak logo started up as normal, but it just froze there. I thought the cart just errored or something, so I turned it off and on. The same thing happened. I tried pressing A and start over and over, and all of the buttons. Eventually the logo vanished and there was a black screen for about 5 seconds. Suddenly, rather than going to the usual menu screen, I was already in-game in a previous save file, which was odd as I was expecting all those carts to have been wiped by poor battery. Either way, I wasn't complaining, as I would have chosen the continue option to see what the previous guy did anyway. Well, first off, I checked his trainer information. His name was just ... an ellipsis. He didn't have much originality. I checked his profile, and apparently he had 99999 hours put into the game, with all 16 badges, 999,999 Pokédollars, and all 251 Pokemon on the Pokédex.
Seeing as he apparently had Mew and Celebi logged also, I'm guessing he either used a Game Genie or is a really hardcore Pokemon player back then. I checked his Pokemon to see what badass team he has, and to my surprise I saw 5 unknowns and the 6th Pokemon named Hurry. I'm thinking that this must be some cruel joke by the person who last played the game, but I decided to check the profiles of those Pokemon anyway. As expected, they were different letters of unknown, all level 5. I was a bit shaky with my unknown alphabet at the time, but I identified the word spelled out to be leave. As for the 6th Pokemon, it turned out to be a Cyndaquil. Mind you, this is before they were individualized Pokemon icons. The Cyndaquil looked normal, but it was level 5, with only 1 HP left, with only 2 attacks, Leer and Flash. I don't know why they named him Hurry, but at the time I just disregarded it. The most eerie thing was that despite my volume being at max, none of the Pokemon had said their usual cries. Just pure silence. Having enough of the team, I closed it. I was parked at what appeared to be a room inside of Bellsprout Tower. However, for some reason, there were no NPCs around. Even more eerie was that the pillar in the middle, it didn't move at all. As if just leaning on its side. There was no music at all, and there were no exits or ladder. Or at least, I thought there wasn't. I walked around for a few minutes, but can't seem to find a way out. This was certainly not a room I've seen in the Bellsprout Tower before. I tried checking my items for an escape rope, but the bag was completely empty. There wasn't any wild Pokemon either. Finally, I managed to find a ladder, which turned out to be behind the pillar. The screen turned black and the music finally started playing. I had a sudden chill as I recognized the melody I heard to be the theme you hear when you're listening to the radio at the Alph Ruins where the Unknown are at. I immediately realized that it wasn't a loading transition, but rather I was in a dark room and would need flash. Before I took care of that, though, I immediately checked my Pokegear to change the radio to something more pleasant, but it turns out that there was no radio card, or even a phone, nor time cards. There was only a map card in which Gold, ... from earlier, and I'll call him Gold from now on, was just walking in the midst of black. I recalled that Cyndaquil has Flash, so I turned off my Pokegear and made Cyndaquil use Flash. I didn't see any message saying Hurry used Flash or anything like that. The room just became lit. Just like that. And I soon regretted it. The room was chilling blood red, with a linear gray path heading south. The ladder I used to go up or down was not there at all. I had no choice but to head south. The screen got darker every 20 steps I made until I finally made it to the end, which appeared to be a sign. I read the sign which said, "Turn back now." Suddenly I was asked to answer, yes or no. But there was no question asked. I chose yes, as I did not know what it was asking. And the screen went to black again, making a ladder climb sound. The unknown radio music stopped, and in a few seconds was replaced by a not-so-creepy Poke-Flute radio music. I was in another dark room, but I held my breath and used Flash again. Suddenly it said, "Hurry has fainted," which was odd since I recalled that there was no status condition like poison on him, and I clearly wasn't in a battle. I checked my Pokemon quickly, and suddenly he's no longer in my party. In fact, after a bit of investigation, none of my Pokemon are there, but instead all were replaced with level 10 Unknown. I did the same thing as before and spelled out the Unknown. My then team of Unknowns spelled, "He died." Either way, after that creepy change, the room was lit to reveal myself in a very small room that appears to be only 4 squares big. The walls of that room were gray bricks, as if I was inside something that was hollowed out. Outside the room appears to be a bunch of graves, similar to the ones in Pokemon Red and Blue. I've walked around that small room and pressed A, but nothing happened. I've already concluded that this was clearly a hacked game and some sadistic fuck sold it to GameStop. However, my curiosity kept me going. I checked the trainer profile of ... again, only to find out that the sprite of Gold was missing his arms. He also seems to appear less smug, but rather seems more sad and empty, in a way that I don't know how to describe. For some reason, it also now says that he has 24 badges, which was clearly impossible. After a few minutes of aimlessly wandering, my character suddenly spun and did the escape rope spinning animation. Instead of flying straight up, though, my character spun downwards, slowly, as if sinking. After that screen, the music stopped. After finally landing, the overworld sprite of Gold is colored differently now. Instead of the usual red color he dons, he appears completely white, including his skin. It's as if he came straight from the colorless Game Boy games placed in a colored background of the Game Boy Color. I checked his profile, and now it's just as white as his overworld sprite. He lost his legs and has what appears to be bloody tears from his eyes. It also says he now has 32 badges, which now starts to disturb me as the change of numbers seems to present something important. I also checked my Pokemon, which this time contains 5 unknown and a level 100 Celebi without a nickname. The unknown at this time leveled 15 and spelled out dying. I checked the Celebi's profile. It was a shiny Celebi, except there's only half of the sprite. 1 leg, 1 arm, 1 eye. It only has 1 attack. Perish Song. The area I was in itself was the Sprout Tower with the immobile pillar as before, except everything is apparently red now. I walked north for what felt like forever. Eventually, I finally encountered some generic men and women, NPCs. They were all lined up to the side, just facing a long, slantish pillar on the middle. They were all white, and nothing happened when I tried to speak to them. I kept on going north until eventually the pillar finally appears chopped off, with a transparent red in that spot. I went up to the red, and without even pressing A, I was suddenly engaged, and finally in a battle. And the music starts again, which it sounds like the unknown radio music again, but played backwards. Gold's battle sprite matches his front one with 1 bloody eye, white skin, and lack of arms, while Red's sprite was the same as before, except transparent. The text simply said, "Wants to battle," as if he has no name, and both of us only have 1 Pokemon each, which is weird, as I swear I had 6 with unknowns. My shiny Celebi came out, conveniently with half a sprite, for the back sprite as well. The shiny noise and animations were different, as the sounds it made sound like multiple screech attacks, used consecutively. Red sent out seemingly normal male Pikachu, except his level is 255. And his sprite seems sad and has tears in his eyes. Rather than usual fight, item, Pokemon, and run menu, I was only given the option to use attacks. Since Celebi only has 1, I chose it. Naturally, since Pikachu is level 25, he went first. Pikachu used Curse, lowering his speed and increasing his other stats. I'm not even sure if Pikachu could use Curse. Celebi used Perish Song. In 3 turns, both Pokemon will get KO'd. Not like I have a choice. At this point, I didn't even go back to the fight menu, as the battle just continued, without me. Also note that there was no animations at all for some reason. Pikachu used Flail, which didn't do much damage despite his level and boost, as his health was maxed. Celebi used Perish Song. Nothing happens. as it's already been used. Pikachu used Frustration, which did a shit ton of damage, knocking Celebi down to less than 10 HP. Celebi used Pain Split, which surprised me as Celebi didn't even have that attack in the first place. And now Celebi and Pikachu have about 150 HP. Pikachu used Mean Look. Not like that did anything. As expected, due to the effects of Perish Song, my Celebi fainted. Except in the text it said, Celebi has died. And instead of the ordinary drop off the screen animation, the Celebi back sprite just vanished. For some reason, the Pikachu was still up, and even with Perish Song, it didn't count as my loss. Pikachu used one more attack beyond the 5 attack limit. Pikachu used Destiny Bond. Afterwards, it said, Pikachu has died, with a slow fade-out animation. Apparently I was the winner, as the transparent red sprite showed up and said, nothing. At that point, I was just freaked out, as that transparent red sprite was suddenly beheaded, leaving nothing but his transparent body. The battle then ended at that point and faded out along with the music. I'm back in the overworld with another change to the gold sprite. He's now as transparent as Red's overworld sprite. I quickly checked Gold's profile, where this time the only thing remains of him is his head, with a transparent skin. The head was zoomed in a bit, showing black voids in his eyes. It now stated that he now has 40 badges. I then backed out and checked my Pokemon. They were all level 20 shiny unknowns, which when spelled out, read no more. I was at what I now know is next to the end. There was apparently no music playing, but for some reason I still felt like there was something. There was apparently no music playing, but for some reason I still felt like something was there that could be heard. I was back in my room in Newbark Town. Maybe finally I get to play this game properly, but who am I kidding? I knew that sadistic fuck must have done something. I walked around my room to interact with things, as I'm a bit afraid to go down the stairs to see what awaits me down there. Note I say walked, as while the background was moving, Gold was not moving his transparent limbs at all. Just floating, like those ghosts you see in Diamond and Pearl. As expected, the radio, computer, and TV did not work, so I had no choice but to go to the stairs. I ended up in the same lower level of my house. Everything appears normal, except Mom isn't home. After failing to interact with anything in this room, I decided to go outside. To my surprise, the door leading outside at the south didn't work, and instead I just walked straight through it, to a void. Continued moving south to see what the fuck was going on. My house vanishes as I head south into the void. It was creepy, as when I entered the void, the outline on Gold's transparent sprite turned white to contrast with the black background. Eventually I reached a white area, and Gold's sprite turned black and transparent again. I continued south without thinking to stop at all. After a long trek south, I finally encountered something. It was Gold's regular sprite. I talked to it. He said, "Goodbye, forever." And vanished. As that happened, it said, "Use Nightmare?" At that point, I would not deny that being possible. Gold did another escape rope animation spinning slowly downwards like before. I'm now back into that small hollowed out room surrounded by the graves earlier, or at least I say it was back there, as there's no sprites anymore. I tried to walk around but nothing moved, not even wall bump noises. I checked my trainer profile with absolutely no gold sprite left. It said I have 0 badges, and all the pictures of the Johto gym leaders at the bottom were replaced with skulls. I checked my Pokemon, which were all level 25 unknowns. As expected, It spelled out a phrase that I dared to read. I'm dead. As soon as I went back to the overworld, the room I supposedly was in was then covered with the same blocks as the walls. I then figured out exactly what the room was when the final text said, R.I.P. The room was a big grave, surrounded by other graves. Gold has already been dead. He died presumably a few years after he defeated Red. He was a young trainer who, despite his efforts in collecting so many badges and attempts at becoming a Pokemon master, was still unable to avoid the inevitable fate of death. And his efforts were eventually forgotten by the next generation. I was unable to escape from the text no matter what I pressed. I tried resetting the game and the same thing happened, at which I then finally decided to give up on that horrible nightmare. After that experience, I will never look at the gimmick unknown the same way again. They say that only the first generation have folktales and legends, but the second generation have shown me how unpleasant the truth can be. I eventually enjoyed Soul Silver immensely, but I still can't unthink what that rigged game has told me.
The Lavender Town Syndrome, also known as Lavender Town Tone or Lavender Town Suicides, was a peak in suicides and illness of children between the ages of 7 and 12, shortly after the release of Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, back in February 27th, 1996. Rumors say that these suicides and illness only occurred after the children playing the game reached Lavender Town, whose theme music had extremely high frequencies that studies showed that only children and young teens can hear, since their ears are not fully developed. Due to the lavender tone, at least 200 children supposedly committed suicide, and more developed illness and afflictions. The children who committed suicide usually did so by hanging or jumping from heights. Those who did not acted irrationally, complained of severe headaches after listening to the Lavender Town theme. Although Lavender Town now sounds differently depending on the game, the mass hysteria was caused by the first Pokemon game release. After the Lavender Town incident, the programmers had fixed Lavender Town's theme music to be at a lower frequency, and ever since, children were no longer affected by it. One video appeared in 2010 using special software to analyze the audio of Lavender Town's music. When played, the software created images of the Unknown near the end of the audio. This raised a controversy since Unknown didn't appear until the Generation 2 games, Silver, Gold, and Crystal. The Unknown translate to Leave Now. There was also the said beta version of Lavender Town. It said that the beta version of Pocket Monsters was released to some kids to test the game. The beta version of Lavender Town? The theme music? It's been playing in the background.